The town of Red Flint didn't burn all at once. It died the way most frontier settlements died, slowly, deliberately, stripped bare by men who understood that fear was cheaper than bullets. Jian Vale saw the smoke 3 miles out, rising thin and gray against the morning sky like a question mark written in ash. He'd been walking for 6 days straight, his boots worn through at the heel, his canteen bone dry since yesterday. The horse he'd started with had gone lame outside Prescott, and he'd sold it for enough coin to buy bread and keep moving. Now he had neither horse nor bread, just the clothes on his back, a knife in his belt, and a past he couldn't outrun no matter how far he walked. The smoke meant people. People meant water. Water meant he'd live another day. He adjusted the wide brim of his hat and kept walking. By the time he reached the outskirts, the sun had climbed high enough to turn the desert into a furnace. Red Flint sat in a shallow basin surrounded by scrub brush and cracked earth, a collection of wooden structures that looked like they'd been thrown together in a hurry and abandoned just as fast. Most of the buildings leaned to one side, their walls bleached gray by sun and wind. A church steeple rose crookedly at the far end of the main street, its cross hanging at an angle like a man too tired to stand straight. But it was the people that made Jian slow his approach. They were gathered in the center of town, maybe 40 or 50 of them, clustered together like cattle waiting for slaughter. Men in dusty work clothes, women clutching children. An old priest with his hands folded, his lips moving in silent prayer. They all faced the same direction, their attention locked on the 6 mounted men blocking the road. The riders sat tall in their saddles, rifles resting across their laps, hats pulled low against the glare. They weren't dressed like cowboys. Their clothes were too clean, their boots too polished. These were hired guns, the kind of men who got paid to deliver messages that left bruises. At the front of the group stood a broad-shouldered man with a thick mustache and a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. He wasn't holding a weapon, but he didn't need to. His posture alone said everything. I'm the law here, and the law does what it's told. Jian stopped at the edge of the crowd, close enough to listen but far enough to stay unnoticed. Nobody looked at him. All eyes were on the man doing the talking. A rider in the center of the line, lean and pale, with the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from something cold and hard. You people had your chance, the rider said, his voice carrying easily over the silent crowd. Mr. Crome made you a fair offer, more than fair, but you decided to be stubborn. A woman near the front spoke up, her voice shaking. This is our land. We built this town with our own hands. You built it on land that belongs to the Crome Mining Company, the rider corrected, his tone patient, almost kind. You were squatters then, and you're squatters now. The only difference is Mr. Crome's willing to pay you to leave. That's more generosity than most men would show. We don't want his money, an older man called out. We want what's ours. The rider sighed, like a teacher disappointed in a slow student. What's yours is what the law says is yours. And the law says you've got 72 hours to pack up and clear out. After that, we come back, and we won't be asking nicely. You can't just... We can. The rider's voice dropped, losing its false warmth. And we will. You want to test that, old man? You want to see what happens when you stand between Silas Crome and something he owns? The crowd shifted, uneasy. A few people stepped back. The woman who'd spoken first had tears running down her face, but she didn't make another sound. Jen studied the riders, counting weapons, measuring distances. 6 men. 12 bullets minimum, probably more. The sheriff wasn't drawing, which meant he was either bought or scared. The townspeople were unarmed, soft, the kind of folks who'd spent their lives working soil instead of working violence. If shooting started, it would be over in seconds. Not my fight, Jian thought. He'd learned that lesson the hard way, more than once. The frontier was full of tragedies, and a man could drown trying to stop them all. Better to keep walking, better to stay invisible. But then the rider's gaze swept across the crowd and landed on him. You. The word came sharp and sudden. You new here? Jian didn't move. Around him, heads turned. 40 pairs of eyes found him standing at the back of the group, dust-covered and silent. A stranger in a town full of strangers. I'm passing through, Jian said quietly. That right? The rider nudged his horse forward, the animal's hooves loud against the packed dirt. Funny timing, we're cleaning house, and here you are, just passing through. Coincidence? I don't believe in coincidences. The rider leaned forward in his saddle, squinting. What's your name? Doesn't matter. It matters if I say it matters. Jian met the man's eyes and held them. He'd seen 100 men like this, bullies with badges, cowards with guns, the kind who only felt strong when someone else felt weak. The smart move was to apologize, lower his gaze, shuffle away like a dog with its tail down. The smart move was to survive. But something in the way the crowd stood there, silent and terrified, reminded Jian of another town, another group of people who'd been too scared to fight back. He'd walked away from that one. He'd told himself it wasn't his problem. He still saw their faces at night. My name's Jian Vale, he said clearly, and I'm not looking for trouble. Well, Jian Vale, trouble's all we got here. The rider straightened, his hand drifting toward the rifle on his lap. So maybe you should keep walking before you find some. Maybe I will, Jian said. Soon as I get some water. The rider smiled, showing teeth. Water costs money. I've got money. Not enough. The tension pulled tight, a wire stretched to breaking. Jian could feel it in his chest, that familiar weight that came before violence. The other riders shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. The sheriff took a step back. The townspeople held their breath. And then, from somewhere in the crowd, a child started crying. It was a small sound, a whimper quickly muffled, but it broke the moment like a stone through glass. The rider glanced toward the noise, his expression flickering with irritation, and Jian used that half-second to move. He didn't go for a weapon. He just turned and walked. Not away from the town, but toward the nearest building, a crooked general store with a water barrel out front. Every step was deliberate, unhurried, the walk of a man who knew exactly how far he could push before the shooting started. Behind him, the rider's voice cracked like a whip. Hey, I'm talking to you. Jian kept walking. I said stop. He reached the barrel, lifted the ladle, and drank. The water was warm and tasted like rust, but it was the best thing he'd had in days. He drank slowly, letting the silence stretch, letting the rider stew in his own anger. When he finally lowered the ladle, he turned back to face the mounted men. Thank you for the water, he said politely. The rider's face had gone red. You think you're funny? No, Jian said. I think you've delivered your message. These people heard you. Now, maybe you should ride back and tell Mr. Crown they'll think about it. Who the hell do you think you are? Nobody important. Jian set the ladle down gently. Just a man who's thirsty. For a long moment, nobody moved. The rider stared at him. The townspeople stared at him. Even the sheriff seemed frozen, his hand halfway to his gun, uncertain whether to draw or run. Then the lead rider laughed, a cold, ugly sound. You got spine, I'll give you that. Stupid, but spine. He gathered his reins, pulling his horse around. 72 hours, people. After that, we burn what's left. The 6 riders turned as one and galloped out of town, dust rising in their wake like a departing storm. Jian waited until they were gone before letting out the breath he'd been holding. His hands were steady, but his heart was hammering. That had been close, closer than he'd intended. The crowd began to disperse slowly, people drifting back to their homes in silence. A few glanced at him as they passed, some grateful, some resentful, most just confused. The sheriff lingered for a moment, his face unreadable, then turned and walked away without a word. Jian was alone in the street when the old priest approached. That was foolish, the priest said quietly. He was a small man, bent with age, his face creased like old leather. Those men work for Silas Crome. Cross them, and you cross him. I didn't cross anybody, Jian said. I just got some water. You humiliated them. They'll remember. Let them. The priest studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes sharp despite his years. You're not from around here. No. What brings you to Red Flint? Bad luck, mostly. A faint smile touched the priest's lips. Then you came to the right place. We've got plenty of that. He gestured toward the church. Come. You look like you could use a meal. Jian hesitated. Every instinct told him to decline, to keep moving, to put distance between himself and whatever mess this town was drowning in. But his stomach was empty, his legs were shaking, and the next town was 2 days' walk through open desert. All right, he said. Thank you. The church was cooler inside, shadowy and quiet. The priest led him to a small room behind the altar where a pot of beans sat warming over a low fire. He ladled out a bowl and handed it to Jian along with a piece of hard bread. Eat, the priest said simply. Jian ate. The beans were bland and the bread was stale, but he cleaned the bowl and didn't complain. What's your name? The priest asked, settling into a creaking chair. Jian Vale. I'm Father Esteban. The old man folded his hands in his lap. You picked a dangerous time to wander through Red Flint, Mr. Vale. Seems like it. Do you know why those men want us gone? Jian shook his head. Land dispute, I figured. More than that. Father Esteban's voice dropped. 6 months ago, we were dying of thirst. The wells ran dry, the crops failed, people started talking about abandoning the town. Then one morning, after weeks of praying for rain, the ground split open behind the church. But it wasn't water that came up. He paused, his gaze distant. It was oil, black, thick, bubbling up like the earth was bleeding. At first we thought it was a curse. Then a traveling merchant told us it was worth a fortune, more money than any of us had ever seen. Suddenly, we weren't dying anymore. We were rich. And Chrome found out, Jian said quietly. Within a week. The priest's face hardened. He showed up with papers, deeds, claims going back 30 years. Said this land was never ours, that we'd been squatting on property owned by his company since before the town existed. The law backed him up. The courts backed him up. Even the territorial governor backed him up. We had nothing. No lawyers, no money, no proof. Just our word against his empire. So he's forcing you out. He's erasing us. Father Esteban's voice cracked. Every family here put their lives into this ground. They buried their dead here. They raised their children here. And now he wants to sweep us away like we were never here at all. Jian set down his empty bowl. Why are you telling me this? Because you stood up to his men. Because you didn't run when they threatened you. The priest leaned forward. People here are good, Mr. Vale, but they're not fighters. They're farmers, craftsmen, shopkeepers. They don't know how to resist men like Chrome, but you, his eyes searched Jian's face. You do. You don't know anything about me. I know enough. I know you've seen violence. I know you carry it with you, even when you're trying to walk away from it. Father Esteban's voice softened. I also know you could have kept walking this morning, but you didn't. That tells me something too. Jian stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. I appreciate the food, Father, but I'm not a savior. I'm just passing through. Are you? The old priest rose slowly to his feet. Or are you running? The question hit harder than Jian expected. He turned toward the door without answering. Mr. Vale? Father Esteban's voice stopped him at the threshold. Those riders will come back. When they do, people will die. Maybe not right away, but eventually. Chrome always gets what he wants, and he doesn't care who he has to bury to get it. If you leave now, you'll be just another man who walked away. Jian's hand tightened on the doorframe. And if I stay? Then maybe, just maybe, you'll be the man who stayed. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of copper and rust. Jian stood in the doorway of the church, caught between the cool darkness behind him and the burning light ahead. He thought about the faces in the crowd, the woman with tears streaming down her cheeks, the old man who dared to speak up, the child whose crying had broken the standoff. He thought about other towns, other people he'd left behind. He thought about the weight he carried, the things he'd done and the things he'd failed to do. Then he thought about the riders, their smug certainty, their casual cruelty. Men like that didn't stop unless someone made them stop. And Silas Chrome, whoever he was, sounded like a man who'd never been stopped in his life. Not my fight, Jian told himself again. But his feet didn't move. He stood there as the light faded, as shadows crept across the dusty street, as the town of Red Flint settled into uneasy silence. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The sound carried across the empty land, lonesome and wild, the voice of something that belonged nowhere and everywhere at once. Jian understood that feeling. He turned back to Father Esteban. Tell me about Chrome. Everything you know. The old priest's face split into a weary smile. Come, sit. This will take a while. They talked late into the night. Father Esteban spoke, and Jian listened, absorbing every detail, every name, every piece of the puzzle. By the time the moon rose, he understood the shape of the enemy he was facing. Silas Croum wasn't just a land baron. He was an empire. Mines, railroads, trading posts, entire towns built on his money and crushed under his boot. He owned judges, bought sheriffs, and silenced anyone who challenged him. The oil beneath Red Flint was just another piece of property to him, another source of wealth to be extracted and exploited. But empires had weak points. They always did. The bigger they grew, the more cracks appeared in the foundation. Jian had seen it before, back when he'd worked for men who thought themselves untouchable. Every tyrant made the same mistake. They believed their own myth. They forgot that power was fragile, that fear was temporary, that one determined man with nothing to lose could bring the whole structure down. Where does Croum operate from? Jian asked. He has a ranch outside Ashridge, about 2 days' ride east. That's where he conducts his business, where he makes his deals. The town answers to him completely. And the law? Father Esteban's expression darkened. There's a new judge coming to Ashridge, Edwin Harrow. They say he's honest, that he can't be bought. But he hasn't arrived yet, and even if he does... The priest trailed off, shaking his head. Croum has survived honest men before. Maybe he hasn't met the right honest man yet. Maybe. Father Esteban looked at Jian with something like hope. What will you do? Jian stood, stretching stiff muscles. First, I'm going to sleep. Then I'm going to make sure those riders don't come back in 72 hours. How? A thin smile crossed Jian's face. By making them afraid of what happens if they do. He slept in the church that night, curled up on a wooden pew with his knife within reach. His dreams were restless, filled with smoke and shouting, the ghosts of choices he couldn't unmake. But when he woke before dawn, his mind was clear. He had 3 days. 3 days to change the odds, to shift the balance, to turn frightened farmers into something that might survive what was coming. It wasn't much time, but Jian had learned long ago that a man could do a lot of damage in 3 days if he knew where to strike. The town began to stir as the sun rose. Jian found Father Esteban already awake, kneeling before the crooked altar. I need to talk to the people, Jian said. All of them. The priest looked up. When? Now. By mid-morning, they were gathered again, the same crowd from yesterday, plus a few more who'd heard about the stranger who'd faced down Croum's riders. They filled the church and spilled out into the street, maybe 60 people in all, their faces etched with exhaustion and fear. Jian stood before them, feeling the weight of their attention. My name is Jian Vale, he began, his voice carrying clearly in the morning air. I'm nobody special. I'm not a gunfighter, I'm not a lawman, and I'm not a hero. But I know men like Silas Croum. I've worked for them, I've fought them, and I've seen what they do to people who can't fight back. He paused, letting his words settle. Those riders gave you 72 hours. They think that's enough time for you to break, to pack up and disappear. They think you're weak. And maybe you are. I don't know you well enough to say. But I know this. If you run, Croum wins. If you stay and do nothing, Croum wins. The only way you don't lose is if you make him pay a price he's not willing to pay. How? A man called out. We're not soldiers. You don't have to be soldiers. You just have to be unpredictable. Croum expects you to fold, so don't fold. Make noise. Make it messy. Make it cost him more than the oil is worth. A woman near the front shook her head. He'll kill us. Maybe, Jian admitted, but maybe not. Men like Croum hate risk. They hate uncertainty. If you make this fight loud enough, public enough, he'll have to answer questions. And the one thing tyrants fear more than bullets is questions. What do you want us to do? Father Esteban asked quietly. Jian looked at the crowd, at their worn faces and calloused hands, and felt something shift in his chest, a weight lifting, a door opening, a decision made. I want you to trust me, he said, for 3 days. Give me that, and I'll give you a chance. The crowd murmured, uncertain. Jian didn't push. He just waited, letting them choose. Finally, the old man who'd spoken up yesterday stepped forward. What's your plan? First, Jian said, we make sure those riders know you're not alone anymore. And for the first time since the smoke had led him to Red Flint, Jian Vale smiled. The first thing Jian did was teach them how to watch. Not looking, watching. There was a difference, and in the 48 hours they had left, that difference might keep some of them alive. He positioned sentries at every approach to Red Flint, farmers and shopkeepers who'd never held anything more dangerous than a plow handle, and he showed them how to read the desert the way a sailor reads the sea. Dust rising where there shouldn't be dust. Birds scattering without cause. The quality of silence that came before violence. You see riders coming, you don't hide, Jian told them, his voice steady as he stood in the center of a circle of nervous faces. You ring the bell, every time. I don't care if it's 1 man or 20. You make noise, you make them know they're being watched, and you get everyone to the center of town. Chrome's men rely on fear and isolation. Take those away and they're just hired guns with empty threats. A young man named Mateo Rivera, barely 20, with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn jaw, raised his hand like a schoolboy. What if they start shooting? Then you run, Jian said simply. But you run smart. You scatter. You use cover. And you make them chase you into places they don't know. This is your town. Every alley, every building, every inch of ground. You know it better than they ever will. Use that. That's not fighting, someone muttered from the back. That's just surviving. Surviving is how you win when you're outnumbered, Jian replied, his tone harder now. You want to stand in the street and draw on 6 armed men? You want to watch your neighbors bleed out in the dirt because you thought courage meant dying fast? He let the silence answer for him. I'm teaching you to survive long enough that Chrome has to make a choice. Keep throwing men at a town that won't break, or cut his losses and move on. Make him choose. By sunset on the second day, Red Flint had transformed from a collection of terrified victims into something that resembled a defended position. It wasn't much. Barricades made of furniture and wagon wheels, sight lines cleared, escape routes mapped. But it was more than Chrome would expect, more than he'd planned for. And that, Jian knew, was often enough. He was checking the northern perimeter when he heard hoofbeats approaching fast. The bell rang before he could shout the warning, its iron voice carrying across the settlement. People appeared from doorways and windows, moving quickly but without panic, gathering in the center square just as he'd taught them. But the rider who came thundering into town wasn't one of Chrome's men. He was Mexican, his clothing torn and stained with blood, slumped forward in the saddle like a man barely conscious. His horse was lathered with sweat, its flanks heaving, and when it finally stopped in the middle of the square, the rider simply fell. No grace, no control, just a dead weight hitting the ground hard. Jian reached him first, dropping to one knee beside the fallen man. The stranger was young, maybe 30, with a face that might have been handsome before pain and exhaustion carved it down to bone and shadow. Blood soaked through his shirt from a wound in his side, fresh enough that it was still leaking. "Mateo!" Jian called out. "Get water and clean cloth. Move." Father Esteban appeared at his shoulder, his face grave. "Is he alive?" "Barely." Jian pressed his hand against the wound, feeling warmth and wet. The bullet had gone through, which was good, nothing still inside to dig out. But the man had lost blood, too much blood, and the ride had torn the injury open again. "Help me get him inside." They carried him to the church, laying him on the same wooden pew where Jian had slept 2 nights before. The stranger's eyes fluttered open as they worked, unfocused and glassy with fever. "Easy," Jian said, his hand steady as he cut away the ruined shirt. "You're safe. We're going to patch you up." "No." The word came out as a whisper, desperate and urgent. "No time. Have to tell us later. Right now. Stay still." But the stranger's hand shot out, gripping Jian's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes locked on Jian's face, suddenly clear, suddenly burning with purpose. "Rafael Cruz," he gasped. "My name. Rafael Cruz. Chrome. Chrome shot me. Left me for dead." Jian felt something cold settle in his gut. "Why?" "Because I know." Rafael's grip tightened, his breathing ragged. I know everything, how he built his empire, the murders, the fraud, the judges he bought, the men he buried, all of it. I was one of his enforcers. I helped him do terrible things. But when I tried to leave, when I said I was done, he coughed, blood flecking his lips. He put a bullet in me and threw me in a canyon to rot. Save your strength, Father Esteban urged, his voice shaking. No, no, you don't understand. Raphael's eyes found Jian's again, pleading now. The land here, the oil, it's not about money, it's about covering up. 20 years ago, Chrome stole this valley from a Mexican family, killed them all, men, women, children, burned the records, bribed the territorial office, rewrote the deeds. No one ever questioned it because no one cared about dead Mexicans on the frontier. But if that oil brings attention, if people start digging, they'll find the bodies, they'll find the truth. Jian's mind raced, pieces clicking into place. So he needs this town gone before anyone starts asking questions. He needs it gone before the new judge arrives. Raphael coughed again, harder this time. Edwin Harrow, coming to Ashridge in 3 days. They say he's honest, that he can't be bought. Chrome's terrified. If Harrow starts investigating, if he finds witnesses, the whole empire collapses. Then we get you to Harrow, Jian said firmly. You testify. You bring Chrome down. Raphael's laugh was bitter, wet. I won't. Make it 3 days. I can feel it. This wound, it's bad. His hand fell away from Jian's wrist, strength failing. But you can. Take what I know, use it, make him pay. How? Jian demanded. I need proof, evidence, something more than a dying man's word. My saddlebag. Raphael's voice was fading, each word costing him. Journal, names, dates, everything I did for him, everything he made me do. Hidden accounts, buried witnesses, all of it. Take it to Harrow. Make sure it reaches him. Father Esteban moved to the horse, still standing in the square, and returned moments later with a worn leather bag. Inside was a small book, its pages filled with cramped handwriting, dates and locations, and descriptions of acts so brutal that Jian's stomach turned reading them. This is enough, he said quietly, looking down at Raphael. This is enough to hang him. But Raphael's eyes had closed. His breathing had gone shallow, thready, the sound of a man slipping away. Jian worked through the night, doing everything he could, cleaning the wound, stitching it closed, pressing cloth against the bleeding that wouldn't stop. Father Esteban prayed softly in Spanish, his voice a low murmur beneath the sound of Raphael's labored breaths. Mateo and several others kept watch, their faces grim in the candlelight. Just before dawn, Raphael opened his eyes one last time. Tell them, he whispered, so faint Jian had to lean close to hear. Tell them I tried, to be better, at the end. I will, Jian promised. Raphael smiled, just a little, and then he was gone. They buried him behind the church as the sun rose, in ground that hadn't been consecrated but felt sacred anyway. Father Esteban spoke words over the grave, and the townspeople stood in silence, mourning a man they'd never known who'd given them the weapon they needed to fight back. Jian stood apart from the others, Raphael's journal heavy in his hands. Inside were the names of murdered families, the locations of hidden graves, the paper trail of corruption that stretched across 3 territories. It was enough to destroy Silas Chrome, enough to dismantle his empire piece by piece, but only if it reached Judge Harrow, only if Jian could get to Ashridge before Chrome realized what he carried. What now? Mateo asked, approaching quietly. Jian looked at the young man, seeing determination replacing fear in those dark eyes. Now I ride to Ashridge. I find the judge, I give him this, and I make sure he knows what Chrome really is. What about us? What about the town? You keep doing what I taught you. Stay together, stay visible, make noise. If Chrome's men come back before I return, you don't fight unless you have no choice. You stall, you delay, you make it as difficult as possible, but you survive. That's the only order that matters. And if you don't come back, Jian met his gaze steadily. Then you take this fight to Harrow yourself. You don't quit. You don't give up. You make sure Raphael didn't die for nothing. Mateo nodded slowly. How long will you be gone? 3 days? Maybe 4? Depends on how fast I can ride and what I find when I get there. Jian glanced back at the grave, still fresh, still raw. But I'll be back, one way or another. He left within the hour, taking Raphael's horse and what little supplies the town could spare. The animal was still tired, still worn from its desperate flight, but it had heart and it had speed. That would have to be enough. The ride to Ashridge took him through country that felt like the bones of the earth laid bare, endless stretches of red rock and alkali flats, heat shimmering off the ground in waves, the horizon a hazy line between sand and sky. Jian pushed hard, stopping only to rest the horse and refill his canteen at scattered waterholes marked on a map Father Esteban had drawn for him. He reached the outskirts of Ashridge on the afternoon of the 3rd day. The town was bigger than Red Flint, more permanent, with brick buildings and paved streets, and the kind of prosperity that came from sitting on a crossroads of commerce. Wagons moved through the main thoroughfare, merchants called out their wares, and somewhere a piano played badly in a saloon. It looked civilized. It looked safe. But Jian had learned long ago that civilization was just a thin coat of paint over the same old violence. He tied the horse outside a modest hotel and stepped inside, his boots loud on polished floorboards. The clerk behind the desk looked up, took in Jian's dust-covered clothes and hard expression, and something shifted in his face. A flash of recognition, or maybe just wariness. "Help you?" the clerk asked, his tone carefully neutral. "I'm looking for Judge Edwin Harrow," Jian said. The clerk's eyes narrowed. "What business you got with the judge?" "That's between me and him. Judge Harrow's a busy man. He don't see just anybody who walks in off the street." Jian leaned against the desk, his voice dropping low. "Then you tell him Jian Vale is here with information about Silas Crome. Tell him it's about fraud, murder, and stolen land. Tell him if he wants justice, he'll make time." The clerk swallowed, his composure cracking. "Wait here." He disappeared through a door at the back of the lobby, and Jian stood in the sudden quiet, feeling exposed. Every instinct screamed at him to move, to find cover, to stop standing in the open like a target. But he forced himself to stay still, to wait, to trust that Harrow was the man Raphael had believed him to be. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Finally, the door opened, and the clerk returned with another man, tall and lean, maybe 50, with silver hair and the kind of face that looked like it had been carved by years of disappointment. He wore a dark suit and carried himself with the careful dignity of someone who knew his authority was only as strong as his ability to enforce it. "Mr. Vale?" The man's voice was crisp, Eastern-educated, the accent of someone who'd come west with ideals still intact. "I'm Edwin Harrow. My clerk says you have information about Silas Crome." "I do," Jian said, pulling Raphael's journal from inside his coat. "And you're going to want to sit down for this." They talked in Harrow's room, a sparse space with a desk, 2 chairs, and a window overlooking the street. Jian laid out everything: Raphael's testimony, the journal, the buried graves, the decades of violence and corruption that had built Crome's empire. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, letting the facts carry their own weight. Harrow listened without interrupting, his face growing darker with each revelation. When Jian finished, the judge sat back in his chair, his hands folded tightly in his lap. "This is extensive," he said finally. "If even half of this is true—" "It's all true," Jian cut in. "Raphael Cruz died getting this to you. He spent his last breath making sure you'd know." "And you believe him? You trust a man who admits to being Crome's enforcer?" "I trust a man who took a bullet trying to walk away. I trust what's written in that journal. And I trust that you're the only person in this territory with the authority to do something about it." Harrow picked up the journal, flipping through its pages with the careful attention of a man who understood evidence. "This will start a war," he said quietly. "Crome won't go quietly. He has men, money, influence. If I move against him based on this, he'll fight back with everything he has." "Then fight harder," Jian said, "because right now there's a town full of people waiting to be burned out of their homes. Crome gave them 72 hours. That time's almost up. If you don't act now, they're gone, and the evidence dies with them. What evidence? The oil field, the land deeds, the people who can testify to how Chrome operates. Jian leaned forward, his eyes locked on Harrow's. Red Flint is more than just a town. It's proof. Every family there, every acre of ground, it's all part of Chrome's pattern. If you want to bring him down, you start there. You protect those people, you investigate the claims, and you make it public. Make it so loud he can't silence it. Harrow was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. Finally, he nodded. All right. I'll issue an injunction halting any action against Red Flint pending a full investigation into the land claims. That should buy us time. How much time? Enough to gather witnesses, subpoena records, build a case that can't be ignored. Harrow's jaw tightened. But I'll need protection. Chrome will come after me the moment he realizes what I'm doing. You'll have it, Jian said. I'll make sure of it. And who exactly are you, Mr. Vale? A drifter who happens to know how to fight corruption? A vigilante with a conscience? Jian stood, his expression unreadable. I'm just a man who's tired of watching tyrants win. Harrow studied him for a moment, then extended his hand. Then I'm glad you're on the side of the law. Jian shook it, feeling the weight of that simple gesture. I'll head back to Red Flint tonight. You follow with the injunction as soon as you can. And Judge? Yes? Watch your back. Chrome's already killed to protect his secrets. He won't hesitate to kill again. Harrow's smile was grim. Neither will I. Jian left the hotel as the sun began to set, the sky bleeding red and gold across the horizon. He felt the exhaustion in his bones, the toll of 3 days riding hard and sleeping little, but there was no time to rest. He had to get back to Red Flint, had to make sure the people there survived long enough for Harrow to arrive. He was halfway to his horse when he felt it, that prickling awareness that came from being watched. Jian didn't turn. He kept walking, casual, unhurried, while his mind raced. Someone had noticed him talking to Harrow. Someone had seen him hand over the journal, and now someone was following. He turned down an alley, narrow and shadowed, lined with crates and refuse. His hand moved to the knife at his belt, fingers wrapping around the worn handle. Behind him he heard footsteps, soft, careful, the sound of someone trying to stay quiet. Jian stopped walking. You can come out, he said, his voice carrying in the enclosed space. Or I can come back there and drag you out, your choice. The footsteps stopped. Then slowly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a woman, young, maybe 25, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical braid and eyes that held more intelligence than fear. She wore a simple dress, dusty from travel, and carried herself with the kind of poise that came from education and confidence. Mr. Vale? She said, her voice steady. Jian's hand stayed on his knife. Who's asking? My name is Eliza Harrow. Judge Harrow is my father. That made Jian pause. Your father didn't mention he had family in Ashridge. He doesn't know I'm here yet. I arrived this morning from Denver. She took a step closer, unafraid. I saw you go into his room. I saw the way you looked when you came out, like a man who'd just lit a fuse. So I followed you because I need to know, what did you tell him? That's between me and the judge. Not if it puts him in danger. Eliza's voice sharpened. My father is a good man, Mr. Vale. He believes in justice, in the law, in doing what's right even when it's hard. But he's also stubborn, and he doesn't always see the threats coming until they're already on top of him. So I'll ask you again, what did you tell him? Jian considered her for a moment, weighing trust against caution. Then he made a choice. I gave him evidence that Silas Chrome has been murdering and stealing for 20 years. Evidence that could dismantle his entire empire. Your father's going to use it to start an investigation, and when he does, Chrome's going to come after him with everything he has. Eliza's face went pale. How much time do we have? Not much. Maybe a day, maybe less. Depends on how fast word spreads. Then we need to get him out of Ashridge, tonight. He won't go, Jian said flatly. Men like your father don't run. They dig in and fight. Then we protect him here. Eliza's eyes burned with determination. You know how to fight, don't you? I can see it in the way you move, the way you watch everything. Help me keep him alive long enough to finish what you started. I have to get back to Red Flint. There are people there depending on me. And my father is depending on you too, whether he knows it or not. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. Please, I came here to help him, but I can't do this alone. If Chrome's men come for him, I need someone who knows how to stop them. Jian looked at her, this young woman with her father's stubborn courage and her own fierce loyalty, and felt the weight of another choice settling on his shoulders. He could ride back to Red Flint, fulfill his promise to Mateo and Father Esteban, and hope Harrow could protect himself. Or he could stay, guard the one man who had the power to bring Chrome down, and trust that the people of Red Flint could hold out a little longer. Neither option was good. Both carried risk. But one carried hope. All right, he said finally. I'll stay. But only until your father's safe. After that, I'm gone. Eliza's relief was visible. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. They returned to the hotel together, slipping in through a side entrance to avoid attention. Jian explained the situation to Harrow, who listened with growing concern. Eliza, you shouldn't be here, the judge said, his voice heavy with worry. This isn't safe. Nowhere is safe when you're going after Silas Crown, she replied. At least here I can help. She's right, Jian added. Chrome's people are going to come. The only question is when and how many. We need to be ready. Harrow sighed, the sound of a man who knew he'd already lost the argument. What do you suggest? We barricade this room, we keep watch in shifts, and we don't let anyone in unless we know them. Jian moved to the window, scanning the street below. How many men do you trust in this town? Truly trust? Maybe 3. The rest? Harrow shook his head. Chrome owns most of them, one way or another. Then we assume we're on our own. Jian turned back to face them. How long before the injunction is official? I can file it first thing tomorrow morning. Once it's on record, Chrome can't move against Red Flint without defying a court order. He'll do it anyway if he thinks he can get away with it. Then we make sure he can't. Harrow's voice hardened. I'll send writers to the territorial marshal, to the governor's office, to every newspaper within 100 miles. I'll make this so public, so visible, that Chrome will have no choice but to answer for it in court. Jian nodded slowly. That might work, if you live long enough to file it. They fortified the room as best they could, pushing furniture against the door, checking the locks on the windows, keeping weapons close. Eliza proved more capable than Jian expected, moving with calm efficiency, asking smart questions, never once showing fear. As night fell, they took turns keeping watch. Jian took the first shift, sitting by the window with his knife in his lap, watching the street below for movement. The town grew quiet as businesses closed and people retreated to their homes. Lamplight flickered in windows. Somewhere a dog barked. And then, just after midnight, Jian saw them. 4 men, moving together down the street with purpose. They weren't trying to hide, weren't bothering with stealth. They walked straight to the hotel, their hands near their guns, their faces hard in the moonlight. Wake up, Jian said quietly. They're here. Harrow and Eliza came alert instantly. The judge moved to the door, checking the barricade. Eliza picked up a heavy candlestick, her knuckles white around the brass. Below, the men entered the hotel. Jian heard voices, muffled but angry. The clerk protesting, someone snarling back. Then footsteps on the stairs, heavy and deliberate. Stay behind me, Jian told Eliza, positioning himself between her and the door. The footsteps stopped outside. A fist pounded against the wood, hard enough to rattle the frame. Judge Harrow! A voice called out, rough and impatient. Open up! We need to talk! Harrow stepped forward, his voice steady. It's late. Come back in the morning. We're coming in now. You have no authority here. This is a private room. Authority? The man on the other side laughed, ugly and cold. Mister, Chrome sends his regards, Judge. Says he heard you've been collecting stories, lies and slander from dead men and drifters. He wants you to know that's a dangerous hobby. Might get you hurt. Tell Mr. Crown that if he has concerns about my investigation, he can address them in court. Court ain't gonna help you, old man. Not where you're going. The door shuddered as something slammed into it. A shoulder, maybe a boot. The barricade held, but Jian could see the frame starting to crack. Back window, he said to Harrow. Go, now. I'm not running from these thugs. You're not running. You're surviving. Jian shoved the judge toward Eliza. Get him out. I'll hold them off. What about you? Eliza demanded. I'll catch up. The door cracked again, wood splintering. Jian heard someone say, Get the axe. Go, he shouted. Harrow hesitated one more second, then grabbed his daughter's hand and moved to the window. They disappeared through it just as the door finally gave way, the barricade collapsing inward in a crash of furniture and violence. The four men poured into the room, weapons drawn, eyes wild. They saw Jian standing alone, his knife in his hand, and they grinned like wolves who'd found prey. Where's the judge? The leader demanded. Jian smiled cold and sharp. Gone, and you're not getting him back. Then he moved. The first man came in fast, gun raised, confidence written across his face like a promise he'd made to himself 100 times before. Jian didn't give him time to fulfill it. He stepped inside the man's reach, drove his knife upward beneath the ribs, and twisted. The gun clattered to the floor unfired. The man's eyes went wide with shock, then empty, and Jian shoved him backward into his companions. The second man stumbled, caught off balance by the falling body. Jian was already moving, his free hand grabbing the third man's wrist as the pistol came up, redirecting the barrel just as it fired. The shot went wide, punching through the ceiling in a spray of plaster. Jian slammed his forehead into the man's nose, felt cartilage crunch, then swept his legs out from under him. The man hit the floor hard, skull bouncing against wood. 3 seconds. 2 men down. The remaining pair finally got their bearings. One raised his rifle, finger tightening on the trigger, but Jian threw his knife. It wasn't a perfect throw, the balance was wrong, the angle awkward, but it was enough. The blade caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him sideways, his shot going wild. The rifle roared, deafening in the enclosed space, and Jian felt the heat of the bullet pass close enough to singe his shirt. The last man standing was the leader, the one who'd done all the talking. He had his pistol out now, hammer cocked, barrel steady despite the chaos. His eyes met Jian's across the wreckage of the room, and something like respect flickered there. Fast, he said, breathing hard. Real fast, but not fast enough. Jian saw the finger squeeze, saw the hammer start to fall, and knew with absolute clarity that he wasn't going to make it. The mathematics of violence had finally caught up to him. This was where it ended. Then the window behind the gunman shattered inward, and Judge Harrow came through it like an avenging spirit, swinging a thick piece of lumber he'd found in the alley. The wood caught the leader across the back of the head with a wet crack, and the man dropped like a stone, his unfired pistol skittering across the floor. Jian stood in the sudden silence, blood on his hands, his heart hammering against his ribs. Harrow stood framed in the broken window, his silver hair wild, his suit torn, the lumber still gripped in his white-knuckled hands. Behind him, Eliza's face appeared, pale and frightened, but determined. I told you to run, Jian said, his voice rough. And I told you I don't run from thugs, Harrow replied. He dropped the lumber, his hands shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. Are you hurt? No. Jian checked the fallen men, 2 dead, 2 unconscious. The one he'd shot in the shoulder was groaning, clutching the wound, his face gray with pain. But we need to move. This was just the first wave. Chrome will send more. Then we end this now. Harrow's voice had changed, hardened into something Jian hadn't heard before. I'm filing that injunction tonight. I don't care if I have to break into the courthouse and write it by lamplight. And then I'm issuing a warrant for Silas Chrome's arrest on charges of murder, fraud, and conspiracy. You can't arrest him without evidence in hand, Jian said. Raphael's journal is just testimony. You need the graves, the witnesses, the paper trail. You need time to build the case. Then I'll buy time. Harrow straightened his torn jacket, dignity reasserting itself despite the chaos. I'll make enough noise that Chrome can't silence me without exposing himself. I'll force him into the open where everyone can see what he is. Eliza stepped through the window, glass crunching under her boots. Father, that's suicide. No, it's justice. The judge met his daughter's eyes. I didn't come to this territory to hide from powerful men. I came to prove the law still matters, even on the frontier. Especially on the frontier. He turned to Jian. You said there are people in Red Flint who can testify. If they're still alive. Then we go there. All of us. We document everything. We gather every witness, and we bring it all back here in a package so airtight Chrome can't wriggle out of it. Jian shook his head. That's 2 days hard riding. Chrome will have men on the road waiting. You won't make it 10 miles. Then we go a different way. Harrow's jaw set. There's an old mining trail through the canyon country. Rough but passable. Takes longer, but it's not watched. If we leave now, we can be in Red Flint by tomorrow night. What about Ash Ridge? What about making this public? I'll send word through channels Chrome can't intercept. Telegraph to the territorial marshal, letters to the governor, messages to newspapers in Denver and San Francisco. By the time we reach Red Flint, half the West will know what I'm investigating. Harrow smiled grimly. Chrome can kill me, but he can't kill the story. Not anymore. Jian looked at the judge, really looked at him, and saw something he'd stopped believing existed. A man who meant exactly what he said, who would die before compromising his principles, who understood that some fights were worth losing everything for. It was the kind of foolish, beautiful courage that got good people killed. But sometimes, just sometimes, it changed the world. All right, Jian said, we ride together. But we do it smart, and we do it armed. No heroics, no taking chances we don't have to take. Agreed? Agreed, Harrow said. They left Ashridge in the dead of night, 3 riders on horses borrowed from a livery whose owner owed Harrow a favor. The town slept around them, unaware that history was being written in the spaces between its quiet streets. Jian led, following Harrow's directions toward the canyon trail, moving fast but careful, always watching for movement in the shadows. Behind them, Ashridge slowly disappeared into the darkness. Ahead, the canyon country rose like the broken teeth of some ancient beast, all stone and shadow and the promise of hard travel. They rode in silence for the first hour, putting distance between themselves and anyone who might follow. When they finally slowed to rest the horses, Eliza spoke for the first time since they'd fled the hotel. "The man you killed," she said quietly. "Did you know him?" Jian glanced back at her. "No. Does it bother you?" "Yes." The simple honesty of his answer seemed to surprise her. She rode in silence for another few minutes, then asked, "How many men have you killed?" "Enough to know I don't want to kill anymore." Jian's voice was flat, empty of emotion. "But I will if I have to. That's the difference between me and your father. He fights for justice. I fight to survive." "Is there a difference?" "Ask me when this is over." They reached the canyon trail as dawn broke, the sun spilling gold across red stone walls that rose hundreds of feet on either side. The path was narrow, barely wide enough for a single horse, littered with loose rock that clattered under their animals' hooves. It would take them most of the day to navigate, but Harrow was right. No one would expect them to come this way. It was too slow, too dangerous, too likely to break a horse's leg or send a rider tumbling into the ravine below. But slow and dangerous was better than fast and dead. They were halfway through the canyon when Jian heard it, the sound of hoofbeats echoing off stone, coming from ahead. He raised a hand, halting the group, his eyes scanning the trail. The canyon curved sharply about 50 yards ahead, the path disappearing around a blind corner. The sound was getting louder, closer, multiple riders moving fast. "Off the horses," Jian said urgently. "Into the rocks. Now!" They dismounted and scrambled up the sloping canyon wall, finding cover behind a tumble of boulders just as the riders came around the corner. There were 6 of them, moving in single file, their faces hard and focused. They wore the same clean clothes, carried the same weapons, held themselves with the same casual arrogance as the men who'd come to Red Flint and the ones who'd attacked the hotel. Chrome's men. No question. Jian pressed himself against the rock, barely breathing, watching as the riders passed below. They were searching, eyes sweeping the trail, hands near their guns. One of them spotted the abandoned horses and called out a warning. The group stopped, weapons drawn, scanning the canyon walls. "They came through here," one man said, his voice carrying clearly in the enclosed space. "Fresh tracks, still warm." "Then where the hell are they?" another demanded. "Hiding. Or they ditched the horses and went on foot." The first speaker dismounted, examining the ground. "Spread out. Check every crevice, every shadow. Chrome wants them dead before they reach Red Flint." The men began to move, fanning out across the narrow canyon floor, rifles raised. Jian counted 6 weapons, 6 sets of eyes, 6 men between them and the way forward. He could maybe take 2 by surprise if he moved fast and got lucky, but the others would get him before he reached a third, and then Harrow and Eliza would be defenseless. Not good odds. Not even close. He glanced at Harrow, who crouched beside him behind the boulder, his face pale but steady. The judge had picked up a rock, gripping it like a weapon, ready to fight with whatever he had. Beside him, Eliza held another rock, her jaw set, her fear controlled but visible. Jian made a decision. "When I move," he whispered, "you run. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to Red Flint and finish what we started." "What are you going to do?" Harrow asked. "Buy you time." "That's suicide." "Maybe, but it's the only play we've got." Before Harrow could argue, Jian stood up, deliberately scraping his boot against stone. The sound echoed through the canyon like a gunshot. Every head turned toward him. "Up there!" someone shouted. Jian didn't wait. He launched himself down the slope, half running, half sliding on loose scree, moving toward the riders instead of away. The unexpected aggression bought him a crucial second of confusion. Then the shooting started. Bullets spanged off rock, whining past his head, kicking up dust. Jian zigzagged, using every scrap of cover, closing the distance. He hit the canyon floor 20 feet from the nearest rider and kept moving, pure momentum carrying him forward. The man raised his rifle, finger on the trigger, but Jian was already inside his guard. He grabbed the barrel, wrenched it upward as it fired, used the leverage to swing the man around and slam him into the canyon wall. 2 more riders converged, pinning him between them. Jian let go of the rifle and dropped, rolling under the legs of the horses. One animal reared, spooked, throwing its rider. The other kicked out, hooves missing Jian's head by inches. He came up behind them, grabbed a fallen pistol, and fired twice. One man went down. The other ducked behind his horse. Then something hit Jian from behind, driving him face first into the dirt. Weight pressed down on his back, hands grabbed his arms, twisted them behind him. He thrashed, trying to break free, but there were too many of them now. 3 sets of hands holding him down, pinning him to the ground. "Got him!" someone yelled triumphantly. Jian tasted blood and dust, his vision swimming. Through the haze, he saw Harrow and Eliza running, scrambling up the far side of the canyon, disappearing into a crack in the rock face. Good. They were clear. They'd make it. That was what mattered. A boot caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Another kick followed, then another. Jian curled up, trying to protect his head, his vital organs, while the beating continued. He heard voices, angry and excited, arguing about what to do with him. "Chrome wants him alive," one man said. "Chrome wants the judge. This one's just a drifter. A drifter who killed 3 of our guys and just bought the judge time to escape. We take him back, let Chrome decide." Hell with that. We finish him here, tell Chrome we did what we could. Through the pain, Jian felt hands dragging him upright, felt a rope being looped around his neck. The world tilted sickeningly as they hauled him onto a horse, his hands bound behind his back, the noose tight enough to choke. Someone slapped the horse's flank, and it started walking, the rope paying out behind it. "Look at that," a voice said, amused. "We're going to drag this Chinese bastard that all the way back to Ashridge. Let the whole town see what happens to people who cross Silas Chrome." Jian's vision was fading, gray creeping in at the edges. But through the fog, he saw something that made him smile despite the rope, despite the pain, despite knowing he was probably going to die. Harrow and Eliza were gone. Really gone. The canyon had swallowed them up, and these men had no idea which way they'd fled or how to follow through that maze of stone. The judge would make it to Red Flint. He'd gather the witnesses, document the crimes, build the case that would bring Chrome's empire down. Raphael's death wouldn't be for nothing, neither would his own. The horse walked, and Jian stumbled behind it, the rope burning his throat, his bound hands making it impossible to keep his balance. He fell, was dragged, struggled back to his feet, fell again. The men laughed, taking their time, enjoying the spectacle. This was what they did best, breaking people, making examples, teaching fear. But Jian had learned something over the years, something these men would never understand. Fear only worked on people who had something left to lose. And the man stumbling through the dust behind that horse, the noose tightening with every step, had already lost everything that mattered, which meant he had nothing left but spite and stubbornness. He made it 3 miles before his legs finally gave out. The men stopped, pulled him upright, checked the rope. One of them slapped him across the face, hard enough to snap his head sideways. "Still breathing," the man observed. "Tough son of a bitch. Won't matter in an hour. Look at him. He's half dead already. Chrome's going to want to see him suffer. Drag him through Ashridge, let everyone watch. Then we string him up proper." They threw him back on the horse, belly down this time, his head hanging, blood dripping from his nose and mouth onto the animal's side. The world became a blur of pain and motion, jolting and endless, punctuated by the voices of men who'd stopped seeing him as human. Jian drifted, consciousness slipping away in pieces. He thought about Red Flint, about Father Esteban and Mateo, and the people who'd trusted him. He thought about Harrow, riding hard for a town that might already be ashes. He thought about Raphael, dying on a church pew, whispering about redemption. He thought about all the choices that had led him here, to this moment, bleeding and bound on a frontier that had never wanted him in the first place. And he thought about the irony of it all, that after years of running from violence, of trying to walk away from the man he'd been, he was going to die doing the one thing he'd sworn never to do again, standing between evil and the innocent. They reached Ashridge in the late afternoon, the sun hanging low and red on the horizon. The men rode straight down the main street, making sure everyone saw, making sure the message was clear. Jian hung limply across the horse, barely conscious, his face a mask of bruises and blood. People came out to watch. They lined the street, silent and frightened, their faces blurring together in Jian's fading vision. He heard whispers, felt their eyes on him, understood that this was the point, not just to kill him, but to kill hope, to show the whole town what happened when you challenged Silas Crome. They stopped in the town square, in front of the courthouse where Harrow had planned to file his injunction. A gallows stood there, permanent, well-used, its wood worn smooth by weather and rope. The men dragged Jian off the horse and hauled him up the steps, his legs refusing to support his weight. The noose was already in place, hanging ready, swaying slightly in the evening breeze. Someone adjusted it around Jian's neck, tightening it, positioning it just so. His hands were still bound. His vision swam. The crowd had grown larger, 50 people now, maybe more, all watching in horrified silence. One of Chrome's men stepped forward, his voice carrying across the square. "This man conspired with a corrupt judge to spread lies about Mr. Silas Crome, a pillar of this community and a benefactor to us all. He resisted lawful authority, killed 3 deputies, and attempted to flee justice. By the power vested in me by Mr. Crome and the territorial government, I hereby sentence him to hang by the neck until dead." It was a performance, Jian realized, through the haze of pain. A script written and rehearsed, designed to give murder the appearance of legitimacy. The crowd knew it was a lie. The men delivering it knew it was a lie. But lies told loudly enough, backed by enough violence, became truth by default, unless someone called them out. "Stop this immediately." The voice cut through the square like a blade, clear and commanding and utterly without fear. Every head turned toward the speaker, and Jian forced his eyes to focus through the swelling and blood. Judge Edwin Harrow stood at the edge of the crowd, still covered in dust from the ride, his suit torn and filthy, but his bearing absolutely unshaken. Beside him stood Eliza, her face pale but determined. And flanking them, to Jian's shock, were a dozen men from Red Flint, Mateo Rivera, Father Esteban, and others, armed with rifles and shotguns, their faces set with grim purpose. The lead executioner sneered, "Judge Harrow, we were wondering when you'd show up. Save us the trouble of hunting you down." "Release that man," Harrow said, walking forward through the crowd, which parted before him like water. "Right now, or I swear by everything I hold sacred, you will answer for this." "You got no authority here, old man. This is Chrome's town." "This is my jurisdiction, and that man is under my protection." Harrow's voice rang out, filling the square, reaching every listener. "I am filing formal charges against Silas Crome for murder, fraud, and conspiracy spanning 2 decades. I have testimony, documentation, and witnesses." This execution is nothing but an attempt to silence evidence and intimidate the people of this territory. It ends now." The executioner's hand moved toward his gun. "You want to join him on that rope?" "If necessary." Harrow didn't slow, didn't waver. "But I don't think you're prepared for the consequences. Look around you. Every person in this square is watching. Every person here will remember. You hang me, you hang him, and you'll have committed murder in front of 50 witnesses." Is that what Chrome wants? Public executions in broad daylight? Because I promise you, that story will reach Denver before sunset. It'll reach Washington within a week. And every newspaper in the country will be asking why a federal judge was lynched in a town square for investigating Silas Chrome. The executioner hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. He glanced at his companions, saw the same doubt reflected back. This wasn't the script. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. In the silence, someone in the crowd spoke up, a woman's voice, trembling but clear. "Let him go." Another voice joined her. "The judge is right." Then another. "This ain't justice." The murmur spread, gaining strength, becoming a chorus. People who'd been too scared to speak, too cowed to resist, found their voices in the presence of a man who refused to be intimidated. The crowd pressed closer, their fear transforming into anger, into solidarity, into something that looked dangerously like courage. The executioner saw it happening, saw control slipping away, and made the worst choice possible. He drew his gun. "Back off, all of you, or we start shooting." Mateo Rivera's rifle came up instantly, the barrel steady despite his young hands. "You fire that weapon, and you'll be dead before the echo fades." The other men from Red Flint raised their weapons as well, forming a line between Harrow and Chrome's men. The square had become a powder keg, one spark away from an explosion that would leave bodies scattered across the dirt. And standing in the middle of it all, the noose around his neck, Jian felt something shift. The fear, the resignation, the acceptance of death, all of it fell away, replaced by a cold, focused clarity. He'd bought Harrow time to reach Red Flint. The judge had used that time to gather allies, to rally support, to turn the tables on Chrome's carefully orchestrated execution. Now it was Jian's turn to finish what he'd started. He took a breath, felt the rope tighten against his throat, and spoke for the first time since they'd dragged him into town. "You want to know what's in that journal?" His voice was rough, barely audible, but in the tense silence it carried. "You want to know what Rafael Cruz wrote before Chrome shot him and left him to die?" Every eye turned to him. The executioner's face went white. "Names," Jian continued, forcing the words past the constricting rope. "Dates, locations, 20 years of murder and theft. Families killed, land stolen, judges bribed, marshals bought. All of it documented, all of it signed in Rafael's hand. He spent his last breath making sure the truth survived, even if he didn't." "Shut up," the executioner hissed. "Why?" Jian met his eyes, unflinching. "Because you know what happens when people hear the truth? They stop being afraid. They stop believing the lies. They remember that tyrants only have power as long as people let them." "I said shut up!" The executioner raised his pistol, pointing it at Jian's head. "One more word, and I blow your brains out right here." "Then do it," Jian said calmly. "Pull that trigger in front of all these witnesses. Make me a martyr. See how that works out for Chrome." The standoff stretched, seconds feeling like hours. The executioner's hand shook, his finger on the trigger, his face twisted with rage and fear, and the dawning realization that he'd lost control of the situation completely. Then Sheriff Marcus Webb stepped out of the crowd, his star glinting in the fading light, his expression grave. "Put the gun down, Hayes," the sheriff said quietly. "This has gone far enough." The executioner, Hayes, turned on him, desperate now. "You work for Chrome, we all do. You gonna let this judge waltz in here and tear down everything we built?" "We didn't build anything," Webb said, and there was something like shame in his voice. "We just looked the other way while Chrome built an empire on bones and lies. But I'm done looking away." He drew his own weapon, not pointing it at anyone, just holding it ready. "Judge Harrow's right. This ends now. Cut that man down." "Sheriff, you can't." "I can, and I am. Cut him down, Hayes. That's an order." For a long moment, Hayes stood frozen, caught between loyalty and self-preservation, between the man who paid him and the law he'd sworn to uphold. Then his shoulders sagged, defeat washing over his face like a wave. He holstered his gun and climbed the gallows steps, sawing through Jian's bonds with a knife. The rope fell away. Jian's hands came free. He collapsed immediately, his legs refusing to hold him, but Mateo was there, catching him, lowering him gently to the wooden platform. "Easy," the young man said. "We've got you." Harrow was already moving, barking orders, taking command of the square with the authority of a man who knew the law was finally on his side. "Sheriff Webb, I want these men arrested and held for trial. Charges include assault, kidnapping, and attempted murder. I want a guard posted on the jail, trusted men only, no one with ties to Chrome." "Yes, sir," Webb said, relief evident in his voice. He started calling out names, deputizing townspeople on the spot, organizing a response that should have happened years ago. Eliza appeared beside Jian, her hands gentle as she examined his injuries. "Can you stand?" "Not yet." Jian's voice was hoarse, his throat raw from the rope. "Give me a minute." "You bought us that minute," she said softly. "You bought us all of them. Father said you'd probably die doing something stupid and heroic. Looks like he was right about the stupid part." Despite everything, Jian laughed, a painful wheezing sound but genuine. "How did you make it back so fast?" "We didn't go to Red Flint. We went halfway, met Mateo and the others coming to Ashridge, and turned around. Father decided the best way to save you was to bring the fight here, make it public, force Chrome's hand." She smiled, tired but victorious. "Seems like it worked." "Where's Harrow now?" "Filing that injunction. It'll be official within the hour, along with warrants for Chrome and everyone in his organization." Eliza's expression darkened. "But Chrome's still out there, at his ranch, surrounded by men and guns. This isn't over." "No," Jian agreed, his hand going to his bruised throat. "It's not." Night fell over Ashridge, but the town didn't sleep. The square buzzed with activity as people who'd spent years living in fear suddenly found themselves free to speak, to act, to demand justice. Harrow worked through the night, documenting statements, organizing evidence, building a case so overwhelming that even Chrome's wealth and influence couldn't deflect it. Jian recovered in the doctor's office, getting his wounds cleaned and bandaged, drinking water to soothe his damaged throat. Father Esteban sat with him, his weathered face creased with concern. "Mateo told me what you did in the canyon," the priest said quietly, "sacrificing yourself so the judge could escape. It was the only move that made sense. It was the move of a man who's stopped running from who he is." Father Esteban's eyes were kind. "You told me you weren't a savior. But those people out there, the ones testifying right now, the ones who finally found their courage, they disagree." Jian looked away. "I'm just a man who got tired of watching tyrants win. And that," the priest said gently, "is exactly what a savior looks like on the frontier. Not perfect, not pure. Just stubborn enough to stand when everyone else kneels." Before Jian could respond, Mateo burst through the door, his face flushed with urgency. "Chrome's coming." Riders spotted him leaving his ranch with 20 men, armed to the teeth, heading straight for Ashridge. "He'll be here by dawn." Jian stood, ignoring the pain that lanced through his ribs. "Then we prepare." "For what?" Mateo asked. "A battle in the streets? People will die." "People will die anyway if we don't stop him." Jian grabbed his coat, wincing as the movement pulled his injuries. "Chrome knows he's lost. The evidence is public. The warrants are filed. The witnesses are talking. But a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. He'll burn this whole town down if he thinks it'll destroy what Harrow's built." They gathered in the courthouse. Harrow, Sheriff Webb, Jian, Mateo, Father Esteban, and a dozen other men who'd finally chosen a side. Maps were spread across tables. Weapons were checked and loaded. A strategy formed, piece by piece, built on the understanding that the next few hours would determine whether justice survived or drowned in blood. "We can't fight him head on," Webb said, his finger tracing the main road into town. 20 armed men against maybe 15 of us who know how to shoot? We'd be slaughtered." "Then we don't fight him," Jian said. "We trap him." Harrow looked up sharply. "Explain." Chrome's coming here for one reason, to silence you and destroy the evidence. He thinks he can intimidate the town back into submission, kill anyone who's testified, and make this whole problem disappear. Jian leaned over the map. But what if we give him exactly what he wants? What if we make it easy? You want to surrender? Mateo's voice was incredulous. I want him to think we're surrendering. Draw him into the square, surrounded by buildings we control, with his men exposed and concentrated. Then we spring the trap. Webb shook his head. That's a hell of a risk. Everything about this is a risk, Jian countered. But if we scatter, if we hide, Chrome hunts us down one by one. This way, we control the ground. We choose the moment, and we make sure there are witnesses to everything that happens. Harrow studied the map, his expression thoughtful. It could work, but we'd need the element of surprise absolutely perfect. One mistake, and we lose everything. Then we don't make mistakes, Jian said simply. They worked through the night, positioning men in windows and on rooftops, creating fields of fire that would turn the square into a killing ground if necessary. They evacuated civilians to the far edge of town, made sure the doctor's office was stocked and ready, prepared for the worst while hoping for something better. And as the first light of dawn crept across the horizon, painting the eastern sky in shades of blood and gold, Silas Crom rode into Ashridge with 20 armed men at his back. He came like a king surveying conquered territory, sitting tall in the saddle, his coat perfectly tailored despite the dust, his face carved from stone and arrogance. Silas Crom was a big man, broad-shouldered and thick through the chest, with steel gray hair swept back from a high forehead and eyes the color of winter ice. He looked like someone's grandfather, dignified and respectable, the kind of man who'd built an empire through hard work and shrewd decisions rather than murder and theft. It was a lie, of course. Everything about him was a lie. But it was a lie told so well, for so long, that even now, surrounded by armed men riding into a hostile town at dawn, he carried himself with the absolute certainty that the world would bend to his will. Behind him, his riders fanned out across the square, rifles held ready but not quite aimed, making a show of controlled force. They were professionals, Jian saw from his position in the courthouse window, not the thugs and hired guns who'd come to Red Flint or attacked the hotel, but the core of Chrome's private army, men who'd been with him for years, who knew exactly what they were doing and didn't flinch from it. The square was empty except for 3 figures standing in the center. Judge Edwin Harrow, his black coat brushed clean, his silver hair combed, looking every inch the federal authority he represented. Sheriff Marcus Webb, his badge polished to a shine, his face set in grim determination. And between them, bruised and battered but standing upright through sheer stubbornness, Jian Vale. They'd argued about this part. Harrow had insisted on facing Chrome alone. Jian had pointed out that alone meant dead. They'd compromised on visible but protected, with Webb as the bridge between law and force, and Jian as the reminder that not everyone could be bought or intimidated. Chrome reined his horse to a stop 20 feet from the 3 men. His eyes swept over them, taking inventory, calculating odds, reading the terrain the way a general reads a battlefield. When he spoke, his voice was cultured, almost gentle, with just a hint of disappointment. Judge Harrow, I'd hoped we could settle this like civilized men, in chambers, with lawyers and proper documentation. Instead, I find you've turned my town into an armed camp and arrested my employees on spurious charges. He shook his head slowly. This is beneath you, beneath the dignity of your office. Your employees kidnapped me and attempted to murder a material witness, Harrow replied, his voice carrying across the square. They dragged an unarmed man through the desert and tried to hang him in a public execution. There's nothing spurious about those charges, Mr. Chrome. They're documented, witnessed, and will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. The law? Chrome smiled, a thin expression that never reached his eyes. Tell me, Judge, whose law? The territorial government that I've helped fund for 20 years? The courts that rely on taxes from my mines and my railroads? Or perhaps you mean federal law, so far away in Washington that it might as well be on the moon? He gestured broadly, encompassing the whole town. This is the frontier, Your Honor. Out here, law is what we make it, and I've been making it a lot longer than you've been wearing that black coat. Then you've been making it wrong, Harrow said flatly. Because the law I represent doesn't bend to wealth or influence. It applies to everyone equally, including men who think themselves above it. Chrome's expression hardened. I built this territory. I brought civilization to wilderness, commerce to wasteland, order to chaos. Every ranch, every mine, every railroad track was paid for with my money and my vision. People prosper because of me. They work, they eat, they raise their children in safety because I made it possible. And you want to tear that down over the word of a dead outlaw and some squatters sitting on land they never owned? I want to prosecute you for 20 years of murder, fraud, and theft, Harrow said quietly. Starting with the Martinez family, killed in 1856 so you could steal their land grant. Continuing through Rafael Cruz, shot and left to die because he tried to walk away from your organization. Ending with the attempted lynching of Jian Vale, whose only crime was standing between you and another group of people you planned to erase. Chrome's jaw tightened, the first crack in his composure. You have no proof. I have Rafael's journal, containing detailed accounts of every crime he committed in your service. I have testimony from witnesses in Red Flint. I have land records that don't match the deeds you claim, surveyor reports that were falsified, and a paper trail of bribes stretching from here to the territorial capital. Harrow's voice rose, filling the square. I have enough to hang you 10 times over, Chrome. The only question is whether you surrender peacefully or force this to end in bloodshed. Bloodshed? Chrome repeated the word slowly, tasting it. Then he laughed, a genuine sound of amusement. You think I'm afraid of bloodshed? Judge, I've built an empire on bloodshed. I've buried better men than you in graves so deep they'll never be found. You stand there with your warrants and your righteous speeches, and you actually believe the law will protect you. He leaned forward in his saddle, his voice dropping to something cold and final. The law is a fiction, Your Honor. Out here, the only thing that matters is who has more guns. He raised his hand, and 20 rifles came up in unison, aimed at the 3 men standing in the square. Last chance, Chrome said softly. Withdraw the charges, destroy the evidence, and get on the next stage to Denver. You'll live, the town stays intact, and we all forget this unpleasantness ever happened, or refuse, and I execute you right here for interfering with legitimate business operations. Your choice. Harrow didn't flinch. I choose justice. Then you choose death. Chrome's hand started to drop, the signal to fire, and Jian knew with absolute clarity that the next 5 seconds would determine everything. If they'd positioned men correctly, if the timing worked, if Chrome's soldiers hesitated even slightly, they had a chance. If not, 3 bodies would be bleeding out in the dirt before anyone could react. The hand fell. Jian threw himself sideways, grabbing Harrow and pulling him down as the first shots cracked across the square. But the bullets didn't hit where they'd been standing. Instead, they punched into the dirt 10 feet away, wild and panicked, because the men firing them were suddenly looking at rifle barrels protruding from every window, every doorway, every rooftop surrounding the square. Mateo's voice rang out from the courthouse window, young but steady. Drop your weapons, you're surrounded. Chrome's men wheeled their horses, trying to find targets, but everywhere they looked, they saw rifles pointed at them. 20 armed riders, trapped in a box of their own making, suddenly understanding they'd ridden straight into an ambush. Hold your fire, Sheriff Webb shouted, his gun drawn, aimed at Chrome. Nobody else has to die today. Put down your weapons and you'll get a fair trial. For a frozen moment, the square hung in balance. Then, one of Chrome's men made the worst choice possible. He raised his rifle toward the nearest window and fired. The response was instant and devastating. The window exploded in return fire, the rider jerking backward as bullets caught him. His horse bolted, throwing him into the dirt, and then the whole square erupted into chaos. Jian rolled behind a water trough as lead filled the air, bullets spanging off stone and wood, screams mixing with gunfire. He came up with a pistol he'd borrowed from Webb, firing at the nearest rider, driving him back. Beside him, Harrow crawled toward cover, surprisingly fast for a man his age. Webb stood his ground in the center of the square, his voice cutting through the noise. Cease fire! Cease fire, damn it! But the shooting continued, Chrome's men returning fire wildly, trying to break out of the trap, their discipline fracturing under pressure. 3 riders went down in the first volley. A 4th took a bullet to the leg, his scream piercing the chaos. The others tried to rally, but they were in the open, exposed, fighting enemies they couldn't see. Chrome himself hadn't moved. He sat his horse in the center of the carnage, bullets passing around him like he was untouchable, his face a mask of cold fury. His hand went to his own weapon, a nickel-plated revolver that looked more decorative than functional. But when he raised it, his arm was steady, and his aim was true. He fired once. Sheriff Webb staggered, clutching his shoulder, blood spreading across his shirt. Chrome fired again, and Webb went down. Jian saw it happen, saw the sheriff fall, saw Chrome calmly thumbing back the hammer for a third shot. Something hot and furious surged through him, burning away caution, erasing fear. He stood up from behind the trough, exposed and reckless, his borrowed pistol coming up in a smooth motion learned long ago and never quite forgotten. "Chrome!" The land baron turned, his pale eyes finding Jian across the smoke-filled square. For just a second, something like recognition flickered there. Not of the man, but of the moment, the understanding that everything he'd built, everything he'd controlled, had finally come down to this. Two men with guns, facing each other while the empire burned. They fired simultaneously. Jian felt the bullet pass so close it stirred his hair. His own shot took Chrome in the chest, high and right, spinning him sideways in the saddle. The revolver fell from the baron's hand, clattering against stone. His horse reared and Chrome tumbled backward, hitting the ground hard. The gunfire began to falter, then stop, as both sides realized what had just happened. Chrome's men stared at their fallen leader, their purpose suddenly unclear. The townspeople in the windows held their fire, waiting to see if the fight was really over or just pausing to draw breath. Jian walked forward slowly, his gun still raised, moving through drifting smoke toward where Chrome lay. Blood soaked the man's expensive coat, spreading from the wound in his chest. His breathing was labored, wet, the sound of a punctured lung filling with fluid. But his eyes were still sharp, still aware, tracking Jian's approach with something that might have been hatred or might have been respect. "Should have stayed gone," Chrome rasped, blood flecking his lips. "Should have kept walking." "Probably," Jian agreed, standing over him. "But I was tired of walking." "You think this changes anything?" Chrome coughed, his body convulsing. "I'm one man. The system, the corruption, it's bigger than me. You cut off the head, two more grow back." "Maybe," Jian said quietly, "but at least this head won't be ordering any more murders." Chrome tried to laugh, but it came out as a gurgle. His hand reached toward the fallen revolver, fingers scrabbling weakly against the dirt. Jian kicked the weapon away, far out of reach. "It's over," he said simply. "You lost." "Nobody wins out here," Chrome whispered. "Just different kinds of losing." His eyes went distant, focusing on something only he could see. His breathing slowed, each inhalation taking longer, coming harder. Then it stopped altogether, and Silas Chrome, who'd ruled the frontier like a feudal lord for 2 decades, died in the dirt of a town square, surrounded by the ruins of an empire that wouldn't survive him by an hour. The remaining riders began to surrender, dropping their weapons, raising their hands. Some tried to run, but found their escape routes blocked by townspeople who'd finally found the courage to stand together. Within minutes, it was over. 11 men dead or wounded, 9 in custody, the street littered with the debris of violence. Jian helped Harrow up from behind the barricade where he'd taken shelter. The judge was pale, shaking slightly from adrenaline, but unharmed. Together they moved to where Sheriff Webb lay, Mateo already kneeling beside him, pressing cloth against the shoulder wound. "How bad?" Harrow asked. "He'll live," Mateo said, relief evident in his voice. "Bullet went through clean, missed the bone." Webb's eyes fluttered open, focusing on the judge. "Did we, win?" We won, Harrow confirmed. "About damn time," the sheriff muttered, then passed out. The aftermath stretched into days. Dr. Morrison worked around the clock treating the wounded. Chrome's men and townspeople alike, making no distinction between sides once the shooting stopped. Harrow organized teams to document everything, taking statements from every witness, photographing the scene, building an ironclad record of what had happened and why. Riders went out to Chrome's ranch and returned with crates of documents, Ledgers detailing bribes, contracts revealing fraud, letters proving conspiracy. They found a safe containing deeds to half the territory, many of them forged or obtained through coercion. They found maps marking locations where, Harrow suspected, more bodies were buried than anyone wanted to count. The telegraph lines hummed with messages to Denver, to Washington, to newspapers across the country. Within 3 days, the story had spread from coast to coast. Corrupt land baron killed in shootout after decades of murder and theft. Federal judge heroically stands against frontier tyranny. The system, for once, had worked. But it was the quiet moments that stayed with Jian, the ones between the chaos and the celebration, when the reality of what they'd done settled over everyone like dust after a storm. He found Eliza on the 4th day, sitting on the courthouse steps in the late afternoon sun. She'd been working alongside her father, taking statements, organizing evidence, moving with the efficient purpose of someone who'd found her calling. Now she just sat, her hands folded in her lap, staring at the square where blood still stained the dirt. 11 men dead, she said as Jian sat down beside her. Some of them probably had families, children, people who loved them. They made choices, Jian said quietly. Bad choices, violent choices. They died because they chose to follow a tyrant and enforce his will with guns. I know. Intellectually, I know that. She turned to look at him. But I keep thinking about what you said in the canyon, that you fight to survive, not for justice. Was this survival, or was it justice? Jian considered the question, watching shadows lengthen across the square. Maybe it was both. Maybe out here, they're the same thing. And Red Flint? What happens to them now? They get their land. Harrow's already working on it, nullifying Chrome's fraudulent claims, restoring the original titles. The oil belongs to the families who've been living there, not to some corporation built on murder. He smiled slightly. Father Esteban told me they're planning to pool the profits, create a cooperative, build schools, churches, a real future. Raphael would have liked that. What about you? Eliza's voice was gentle. What's your future? I don't know yet. Jian stood, his body still aching from the beating, the hanging, the violence that seemed to follow him wherever he went. For now, I'm just trying to figure out what happens next. What happened next came in the form of Judge Harrow's voice, calling from the courthouse doorway. Mr. Vale, a word, if you please. Jian climbed the steps and followed Harrow into his makeshift office, where papers covered every surface and the smell of ink and coffee hung thick in the air. The judge looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his silver hair disheveled, but there was a light in his expression that hadn't been there before. The satisfaction of a man who'd fought for something and won. Sit, Harrow said, gesturing to a chair. Please. Jian sat, wary. Is something wrong? On the contrary, everything is remarkably right, which is unusual enough to warrant suspicion. Harrow poured 2 glasses of whiskey, handed one to Jian. I wanted to thank you properly before you disappear again, which I assume you're planning to do. I'm not much for staying in one place. No, I imagine not. Harrow sipped his drink, studying Jian over the rim of the glass. You know, I did some checking, telegraphed colleagues back east, pulled some records. Jian Vale isn't your real name, is it? Jian's hand tightened on his glass. Does it matter? Not legally, no, but it matters to my curiosity. Harrow leaned back in his chair. You move like someone with military training. You think tactically, speak multiple languages, understand law and commerce better than most drifters I've met. And you have the kind of tactical mind that comes from experience, not luck. A lot of men learn to fight in the war. True, but the war you fought in wasn't the Civil War, was it? Harrow's eyes were sharp, piercing. You're too young for that, and your methods are different, more sophisticated, almost professional. Jian met his gaze steadily. What exactly are you asking, Judge? I'm not asking anything. I'm observing. Harrow set down his glass. Here's what I think. I think you came to this territory running from something, probably something you did in service to someone who didn't deserve your loyalty. I think you've spent years trying to walk away from violence, only to discover it follows you anyway. And I think what happened here, standing up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves, is who you actually are. Underneath all that running, you're giving me too much credit. Am I? You could have kept walking when you reached Red Flint. Could have let Crom's men burn it to the ground while you saved yourself. Instead, you stayed. You fought. You nearly died multiple times and you kept getting back up. That's not survival instinct, Mr. Vale. That's character. Jian looked away, uncomfortable with the praise. I did what needed doing. Yes, and that's why I'm offering you a choice. Harrow pulled a document from his desk, slid it across to Jian. The territorial governor has authorized me to appoint special deputies as I see fit, men who can help maintain order, investigate corruption, and ensure justice reaches the places regular law can't. He tapped the paper. This is a commission. It's yours if you want it. Jian stared at the document, seeing his name, his chosen name, written in formal script, backed by the seal of federal authority. It was an offer of legitimacy, of purpose, of a path forward that didn't involve running. I'm not law material, he said finally. I've done things, Judge. Things that would make you reconsider this offer if you knew the details. I don't need to know the details. I know what you did here, how you did it, and why. That's enough. Harrow's voice softened. You can't outrun your past, Mr. Vale. None of us can. But you can choose what you do with your future. This is me giving you that choice. Jian picked up the commission, felt the weight of it in his hands. It would mean staying, putting down roots, becoming part of something larger than himself. It would mean giving up the safety of anonymity, the freedom to walk away when things got complicated. It would mean trust, commitment, accountability, all the things he'd spent years avoiding. But it would also mean purpose. It would mean using the skills he'd tried to bury for something that mattered. It would mean standing between evil and innocence, not just once, but as a way of life. He thought about Father Esteban's words. That's exactly what a savior looks like on the frontier. Not perfect, not pure, just stubborn enough to stand when everyone else kneels. Can I think about it? Jian asked. Take all the time you need. Harrow stood, extending his hand. But for what it's worth, I hope you say yes. The frontier needs more men willing to fight for what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They shook hands, and Jian left the courthouse with the commission folded in his pocket, a physical weight against his chest. Outside, the town was settling into evening, lamplight beginning to glow in windows, people moving about their business with the cautious optimism of those who'd survived a storm and were learning to trust the calm that followed. He walked without direction, letting his feet carry him through streets that were beginning to feel familiar. He passed the hotel where Crom's men had tried to kill them, now being repaired, its broken windows replaced with fresh glass. He passed the square where the final battle had been fought, where workers were already washing away the blood and filling in the bullet holes. He ended up at the stable where he'd left Raphael's horse, the animal that had carried a dying man to deliver truth, that had carried Jian through the desert and into this strange new future. The horse nickered softly when it saw him, pushing its nose against his hand. What do you think? Jian asked quietly, stroking the animal's neck. Should we stay? Or should we keep running? The horse just looked at him with dark, patient eyes, offering no answers. Behind him, footsteps approached. Jian turned to find Mateo Rivera, cleaned up now, his young face serious. Mr. Vale, the young man said formally, the judge told me about his offer. Did he? He also told me I should talk to you, said you might need a local perspective. Mateo leaned against the stable wall. So here it is. Red Flint needs you, not just because you fought for us, but because you taught us how to fight for ourselves. We're going to face more trouble. People who don't want to see us succeed, opportunists trying to take advantage, maybe even Chrome's allies looking for revenge. We need someone who understands how this world really works. You've got Sheriff Webb. You've got the judge. Webb's a good man, but he spent 20 years looking the other way. It'll take time before people really trust him again. And the judge... Mateo smiled slightly. The judge is brilliant at law, terrible at reading people. He needs someone like you, someone who sees the angles, who knows how to think like the enemy. I'm not a hero, Mateo. No, the young man agreed. You're something better. You're real. You make mistakes. You get hurt. You survive anyway. That's what people need to see. That you don't have to be perfect to stand up for what's right. You just have to be willing. Jian was quiet for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. Finally, he asked, "What about you? What are you going to do?" "Me?" Mateo's smile widened. "The judge offered me a job too. Assistant clerk, helping document all the land transfers, making sure everything's done properly. It's not glamorous, but it's important. And it means I get to build something instead of just surviving." His expression grew more serious. "My father always said the frontier belonged to people brave enough to claim it. I think he was wrong. I think it belongs to people patient enough to build it. That's what I want to be. A builder." "That's a good answer. So is yours, I hope." Mateo pushed off from the wall. "Whatever you decide, Mr. Vale, thank you for everything." He walked away, leaving Jian alone with the horse and the gathering darkness. Somewhere in the town, someone was playing a fiddle, the music drifting through the streets, lonely and beautiful. People laughed in a saloon. A woman called her children home for supper. Life, continuing, reshaping itself around the empty space Chrome's death had left. Jian pulled the commission from his pocket, unfolded it, read the words again in the fading light. Special Deputy, Territory of Arizona. Authorized to investigate, arrest, and pursue justice in all matters pertaining to territorial law. Signed by the governor and countersigned by Judge Edwin Harrow. It was a chain, he thought. A different kind than the one he'd worn before, but a chain nonetheless, binding him to this place, these people, this endless struggle between chaos and civilization. But maybe, just maybe, it was a chain he could choose to wear. He walked back to the courthouse, climbed the steps one more time, and found Harrow still working by lamplight, surrounded by the endless paperwork of justice. "Judge?" Jian said from the doorway. Harrow looked up, hope flickering in his tired eyes. "Mr. Vale." "About that commission." Jian stepped into the office, feeling the weight of the decision settle over him like a coat he'd put on for the first time. "I'll take it, on one condition." "Name it." "You let me work my own way. I'm not good at following rules, and I'm worse at politics. But I know how to find the truth, and I know how to protect people who can't protect themselves. That's what you get. Nothing more, nothing less." Harrow stood, extending his hand across the desk. "That's exactly what I was hoping for." They shook on it, and Jian felt something shift inside him. Not a transformation, not redemption, just a small adjustment in the way he saw the road ahead. He was still the same man who'd walked into Red Flint days ago, still carrying the same past, the same scars. But now he had a reason to stay, a purpose beyond simple survival. "When do I start?" he asked. "Tomorrow's soon enough." Harrow's smile was genuine, warm. "Tonight, you should rest. You've earned it." But Jian didn't rest. He spent the night walking the perimeter of Ashridge, checking sightlines, marking escape routes, cataloging threats the way he always had. Old habits, ingrained by years of violence, didn't disappear just because he'd chosen a new path. They'd always be part of him, shadows that never quite faded. The difference was, now he had a reason to use them for something better than survival. Dawn found him standing at the edge of town, watching the sun rise over the desert, painting the landscape in shades of gold and crimson. Somewhere to the west, Red Flint was waking up too, its people beginning the hard work of building a future from the ashes of the past. Somewhere beyond that, other towns faced their own struggles, their own tyrants, their own desperate need for someone willing to stand between evil and innocence. The frontier was vast, brutal, unforgiving, but it was also full of people trying to make honest lives in a dishonest world. People who deserved better than the casual cruelty of men like Chrome. People who needed someone willing to fight for them, even when, especially when, the odds were impossible. Jian had spent years running from that responsibility, years telling himself he wasn't a hero, wasn't a savior, was just a man trying to survive. Maybe that was still true. But maybe survival could mean more than just staying alive. Maybe it could mean helping others survive too, building something that lasted beyond the moment, leaving the world slightly better than he'd found it. It wasn't redemption. He'd done too much, seen too much, lost too much for that simple answer. But it was purpose. And on the frontier, purpose was sometimes the only thing standing between civilization and chaos. Behind him, Ashridge was stirring to life. He heard voices, movement, the sounds of a town recovering from trauma and learning to hope again. He should go back, he thought. Check in with Harrow, coordinate with Webb, start planning for whatever came next. But for just a moment longer, he stood at the edge of the world and watched the sun rise on a future he'd chosen instead of one that had been chosen for him. And for the first time in years, Jian Vale allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he'd finally stopped running long enough to find where he belonged. The sun had barely cleared the horizon when the telegram arrived from Denver. Jian was drinking coffee on the courthouse steps, watching Ashridge wake up to its first full day without Silas Chrome's shadow hanging over it. When he saw the messenger running down the street, his face flushed with urgency. "Judge Harrow," the boy called out, waving a yellow paper. "Telegram from the territorial governor." Harrow emerged from the courthouse, still buttoning his vest, his silver hair uncombed. He took the telegram, read it quickly, and his expression shifted from curiosity to grim satisfaction. "What is it?" Jian asked, setting down his cup. "The governor's sending federal marshals to take custody of Chrome's surviving men and secure all his assets pending a full territorial investigation." Harrow handed him the telegram. "He's also ordering an audit of every land claim, mining operation, and business deal Chrome touched in the last 20 years. This is bigger than I expected. They're treating it as systematic corruption, not just one man's crimes." "That's good, isn't it?" "It's necessary, but it also means Chrome's allies are going to start protecting themselves, destroying evidence, covering tracks. We have maybe 48 hours before people start disappearing and documents start burning." Harrow's jaw set. "Which is why we need to move fast on the most important piece, the land transfer for Red Flint. Once that's official and recorded, no one can touch it. The families will have legal title, federal protection, and ownership of the oil rights." "How fast can you make it happen?" "If I ride out there today with the paperwork, we can have it signed and witnessed by tonight. But I'll need someone with me, someone these people trust, who can explain what they're signing and why it matters." Harrow looked at Jian meaningfully. "Someone who speaks their language, literally and figuratively." Jian stood, his coffee forgotten. "When do we leave?" "Give me an hour to prepare the documents. We'll take Eliza and Mateo. She can notarize. He can translate for the families who don't speak English well. Sheriff Webb will hold things here." They rode out at mid-morning, 4 horses moving at a steady pace across terrain that had become familiar to Jian over the past week. The desert didn't look any different. Same red rock, same scrub brush, same endless horizon, but somehow it felt changed, as if the violence that had erupted in Ashridge had shifted something fundamental in the land itself. Eliza rode beside him, her auburn braid swinging with the horse's motion. She'd been quiet since they'd left town, her expression thoughtful. "Penny for your thoughts," Jian said finally. She glanced at him, a small smile touching her lips. "I was thinking about what happens after this. After the land transfers are complete, after the marshals arrive, after all the legal proceedings finish. What about it?" "Father will stay in Ashridge, at least for a while. Someone needs to oversee the transition, make sure Chrome's empire gets dismantled properly instead of just passing to the next ruthless man with money." She paused, but eventually he'll move on. There are other territories, other jurisdictions that need honest judges. That's what he does. He goes where the law is broken and tries to fix it. "And you?" Jian asked. "Will you go with him?" "I don't know." Eliza's voice was soft, uncertain. "I love my father, and I believe in what he does. But I've spent my whole life following him from one posting to another, always temporary, never putting down roots. Watching what you all built here, this coalition of townspeople, farmers, drifters, all working together for something real, it made me wonder what it would be like to stay somewhere, to build, instead of always moving on. The frontier's hard on people who stay." "The frontier's hard on everyone," she countered. "At least if you stay, you get to see what you built actually grow." Before Jian could respond, Mateo called out from ahead, pointing. "Red Flint! We're here." The town looked different in daylight, more settled, less desperate. Smoke rose from chimneys in straight lines rather than the chaotic haze of the first day Jian had arrived. People moved about their business with purpose, rebuilding what had been damaged, reinforcing what remained. The church still stood crooked at the end of the street, its cross still hanging at an angle, but someone had planted flowers around the base. A small gesture of permanence, of faith that there would be a future worth beautifying. Father Esteban met them in the square, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Judge Harrow, Mr. Vale, welcome back." "Father," Harrow dismounted, shaking the priest's hand warmly. "I've brought the land deeds. Everything's been prepared, verified, and approved by the Territorial Land Office. All that's needed are signatures and witnesses, and these families will own their land free and clear, including all mineral rights." The old priest's eyes misted. 20 years we've waited for those words. 20 years of being told we didn't belong, that we had no claim, that we were just squatters on someone else's property. His voice strengthened. "Raphael would have been proud to see this day." "Raphael made this day possible," Jian said quietly. "Without his testimony, without the journal, Chrome would still be in power, and these people would be scattered to the wind. Then we honor his sacrifice by building something that lasts." Father Esteban turned toward the gathered crowd that had begun to form, drawn by the arrival of the judge and his party. "Come, let's give these families what they've earned." They set up in the church, using the altar as a makeshift desk. One by one, the families came forward. Farmers and shopkeepers, widows and young couples. People who'd spent their entire lives working land they'd been told didn't belong to them. Harrow explained each document patiently, Mateo translating when needed, while Eliza notarized and recorded every signature with meticulous care. An old woman named Senora Alvarez was the first to sign, her hand shaking as she wrote her name across the deed. When she finished, she looked up at Harrow with tears streaming down her face. "This is real?" she whispered in Spanish. "This land is truly ours?" "It's truly yours," Mateo translated Harrow's response. "No one can take it from you now. Not Chrome, not his heirs, not anyone. It's protected by federal law." She clutched the document to her chest like a treasure, then kissed Harrow's hand before hurrying away to share the news with her family. The signing continued through the afternoon, each family receiving not just land but dignity, not just ownership but validation that their years of struggle had meant something. Jian watched from the side of the church, seeing hope replace fear in face after face, and felt something unknot in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it was there. As the last family finished signing, a commotion outside drew everyone's attention. Horses approached at speed, their hoofbeats loud and urgent. Jian's hand moved instinctively to his gun, his body tensing for violence. But the riders who appeared in the church doorway weren't Chrome's men. They wore federal badges, 6 U.S. Marshals led by a tall man with a thick mustache, and eyes that had seen too much frontier justice to be impressed by much. "Judge Harrow?" the lead marshal asked, his voice carrying the flat authority of federal law. "I am," Harrow replied, standing. "And you are?" "Marshal Thomas Bridger, sent by the governor to assist with the Chrome investigation and secure this area pending full legal review." His gaze swept the church, taking in the families, the documents, the scene of bureaucratic triumph. "Seems like you've been busy." "We've been doing our job, Marshal, making sure the law protects the people it's supposed to protect." Bridger's stern expression softened slightly. "That's good to hear. We've been chasing Chrome's corruption for years, never quite able to make anything stick." "When your telegram came through describing what you'd uncovered," he shook his head. "It's about damn time someone brought that bastard down, begging your pardon, ladies." "No apology needed," Eliza said dryly. "We've all been thinking worse." "My men will establish a perimeter around Red Flint and Ash Ridge," Bridger continued. "Make sure no one interferes with your investigation or tries to silence witnesses. We'll also start tracking down Chrome's known associates, the ones who weren't in Ash Ridge when you made your stand. Some of them are dangerous, and they're not going to take kindly to losing their meal ticket." "How many are we talking about?" Jian asked. Bridger's eyes found him, assessing. "You must be Jian Vale, the drifter who started all this." "I just happened to be in the right place at the right time." "That's not what I heard. I heard you stood between Chrome's guns and helpless people more than once. I heard you took a beating, survived a hanging, and still came back fighting. The marshal's expression was approving. That's not luck, Mr. Vale. That's character. Everyone keeps saying that. I'm starting to think nobody knows what that word actually means. Bridger laughed, a rough bark of genuine amusement. Fair enough. To answer your question, we've identified at least 15 men in Crome's inner circle who weren't captured in Ashridge. Most of them are probably running scared, trying to put distance between themselves and the wreckage. But 2 of them concern me. Who? Brothers named Cole and Marcus Brennan. They ran Crome's enforcement operations. The dirty work, the intimidation, the violence he didn't want traced back to him. They're smart, they're ruthless, and they're not the type to go quietly into exile. Bridger pulled out a folded poster, spread it on the altar. These are the men. Jian studied the drawings. Cole Brennan was lean and sharp-featured, with cold eyes and a thin smile. Marcus was broader, heavier, with a face like a clenched fist. Both had the look of men who'd found their calling in cruelty. What makes you think they'll come here? Harrow asked. Because this is where their empire died. Because witnesses are here. Evidence is here. The people who destroyed everything they built are here. Bridger's voice was grim. Men like the Brennans don't just disappear. They come back for revenge first. Then they disappear. Then we'll be ready, Jian said quietly. With respect, Mr. Vale, these aren't hired thugs like the ones you've been fighting. The Brennans are professionals. They've been doing this for 20 years, and they're very, very good at it. So am I. Something in Jian's tone made Bridger pause, really look at him. Whatever the marshal saw in Jian's eyes made him nod slowly. All right, we'll coordinate defenses, establish watch rotations, make sure Red Flint and Ashridge are both protected. But if the Brennans show up, Mr. Vale, don't try to be a hero. Let my men handle it. I'll keep that in mind, Jian said, which wasn't quite a promise. The marshals established their camp on the outskirts of Red Flint, professional and efficient. Bridger assigned 2 men to stay in town, rotating shifts with the local watch Jian had organized. It should have felt safer, having federal law enforcement present. Instead, Jian felt his instincts screaming that something was wrong, that the threat wasn't coming from where everyone was looking. He found Father Esteban in the cemetery behind the church, standing over Raphael's grave. Someone had fashioned a simple wooden cross, planted it in the freshly turned earth. You feel it too, the priest said without turning around. The waiting. Something's coming, Jian agreed. I just don't know what. The Brennan brothers, perhaps. Or maybe just the inevitable settling of accounts. Father Esteban's voice was tired. Violence breeds violence, Mr. Vale. We struck a blow against tyranny, but we also painted targets on ourselves. Chrome had allies, partners, people who profited from his empire. They won't all run. Some will fight back. Let them come. We're ready. Are we? The priest turned to face him. We're farmers and shopkeepers, Mr. Vale. We got lucky once, with surprise and desperation on our side. But if trained killers come for us, if men like these Brennans decide to burn us out as an example, he trailed off, shaking his head. How many more will die before this is truly over? Jian had no answer to that. He'd been asking himself the same question since Chrome's body had been carried away. The empire was broken, yes, the tyrant was dead. But empires didn't die clean, and tyrants always left debris behind, people who'd thrived in the old order and would kill to restore it. The attack came 3 nights later, and it came from a direction no one expected. Jian was doing his evening patrol, walking the perimeter of Red Flint with one of Bridger's marshals, a young man named Cooper, who talked too much but had good instincts. They were discussing the best placement for additional sentries when Cooper suddenly stopped mid-sentence, his head cocking. You hear that? He whispered. Jian listened. At first there was nothing, just the normal night sounds of the desert, wind and crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. Then he heard it. Horses, moving slowly, trying to stay quiet. Multiple riders approaching from the east where the canyon trail wound through the rocks. Ring the bell, Jian said urgently. Get everyone to the center of town, now! Cooper ran while Jian moved toward the sound, his gun drawn, his eyes scanning the darkness. He reached the edge of town just as the first rider emerged from the shadows, not charging, not attacking, just walking their horse forward slowly, hands visible and empty. It was a woman, young, Mexican, her face streaked with dirt and tears. Behind her came others, 5 more riders, all women and children, their clothes torn, their eyes wide with terror. "Please," the first woman gasped in Spanish. "Please, we need help. They're coming. They're right behind us." "Who's coming?" Jian asked, also in Spanish. "The Brennans. They attacked our village, looking for people who testified against Chrome. They burned homes, killed anyone who resisted. We ran, but they followed. They're hunting us." Before Jian could respond, gunfire erupted from the canyon trail. The women screamed, spurring their horses forward into town. Jian saw muzzle flashes in the darkness, heard bullets whine past, and understood with sickening clarity what was happening. It was a trap. The Brennans hadn't come to attack Red Flint directly. They'd come to drive terrified refugees into it, then follow them in under the cover of chaos, breaching defenses that had been set up to defend against external assault, not internal confusion. "It's a breach!" Jian shouted, his voice cutting through the night. "They're using the refugees as cover, eyes on the canyon trail." The town bell was ringing now, people emerging from homes with weapons, the marshals running to their positions. But the refugees were already in the square, their horses wild with panic, scattering the defenders, creating exactly the chaos the attackers needed. Then the Brennan brothers came through the gap like wolves among sheep. Cole Brennan led, his gun already firing, targeting the marshals first with professional precision. One federal man went down, then another. Marcus followed close behind, bigger and slower but just as deadly, his rifle cracking methodically as he advanced. Behind them came 6 more riders, Chrome's last loyal soldiers, making their final stand. "Take cover!" Bridger's voice roared above the chaos. "Protect the civilians!" The battle that followed was nothing like the clean trap they'd sprung on Chrome and Ashridge. This was close-quarters chaos, friend and foe mixed together in the darkness, bullets flying in all directions. Jian saw Mateo go down, clutching his leg, blood spreading, saw Father Esteban dragging children to safety behind the church, saw Marshal Cooper catch a bullet to the chest and crumple without a sound. Cole Brennan's voice cut through the gunfire, cold and mocking. "Judge Harrow, we know you're here. Come out and face justice for murdering Silas Chrome, and maybe we let the rest of these people live." "Don't listen to him," Bridger shouted back. "It's a bluff." "Is it?" Cole's gun barked, and a woman screamed as the bullet tore through her shoulder. "That's one. I can do this all night." How many dead civilians before you admit this was all a mistake? Before you realize you shouldn't have challenged the natural order? Harrow's voice rang out from the courthouse, strong and clear. "The natural order is justice, not tyranny. And I'll die before I let men like you restore Chrome's empire." "That can be arranged." Cole and Marcus started moving toward the courthouse, their men providing covering fire. Jian saw the plan instantly. They weren't trying to win a battle, just kill the judge. Eliminate the legal authority that had brought down their empire, and maybe the whole case would collapse. He couldn't let that happen. Jian stepped out from behind cover, walking into the open, his gun at his side but not raised. "Brennan! Cole Brennan!" The shooting faltered as both sides registered this new development. Cole turned, his pale eyes finding Jian across the bullet-torn square. "The Chinese drifter," Cole said, amused. "I heard about you. Heard you got real familiar with a rope. Should have stayed hung." "Probably," Jian agreed, "but I've got a bad habit of not dying when I'm supposed to." "We can fix that." Cole's gun came up fast, but Jian was already moving, diving sideways as the shot cracked past his ear. He rolled, came up firing, his bullets forcing Cole to take cover. Marcus roared, charging forward, his massive frame shrugging off a grazing shot as he closed the distance. Jian shifted his aim, but Marcus was too fast, too close. They collided, the impact driving the air from Jian's lungs, sending both men sprawling into the dirt. Marcus recovered first, his fist catching Jian across the jaw with the force of a hammer. Stars exploded in Jian's vision. Another punch followed, then another, the bigger man using his weight to pin Jian down while he methodically beat him unconscious. Through the haze of pain, Jian saw Cole moving toward the courthouse, saw Harrow's silhouette in the window, saw the inevitable conclusion approaching like a train. Then Eliza Harrow stepped into Cole's path, a shotgun clutched in her hands. "That's far enough," she said, her voice shaking but the barrel steady. Cole smiled, that thin, cold expression. "Little girl playing soldier. Put the gun down before you hurt yourself." "My father taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old," Eliza said. "At this range, I can't miss. Neither can you. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to drop your weapon and surrender, or we're both going to die in this square. Your choice." "You don't have the spine." "Try me." For a moment, the entire battle seemed to pause. Everyone watching this standoff between a ruthless killer and a judge's daughter who'd found courage in the unlikeliest moment. Cole's finger tightened on his trigger, and Eliza fired. The shotgun blast caught him in the chest at point-blank range, the force of it lifting him off his feet and slamming him backward into the dirt. His gun fell from nerveless fingers, his cold eyes going wide with shock and then empty. Marcus Brennan saw his brother fall and let out a sound that wasn't quite human, rage and grief and fury compressed into a single howl. He stood up from where he'd been beating Jian, his face a mask of pure hatred, and started toward Eliza. Jian grabbed his ankle. It wasn't much of a grab. His hands were slick with blood, his grip weak, but it was enough to make Marcus stumble. The big man kicked free, but the delay cost him his momentum. Marshal Bridger appeared from the side, his rifle firing once, twice, 3 times. Marcus staggered but didn't fall, his size and rage keeping him upright even with bullets in him. He took one more step toward Eliza, raising his gun with shaking hands, determination overriding the fact that he was already dying. Mateo Rivera shot him from behind, the young man dragging himself upright despite his wounded leg, his pistol barking repeatedly until Marcus finally collapsed. The threat ended. The remaining attackers saw both Brennans down and broke, fleeing into the night without their leaders. Bridger's marshals pursued, gunfire fading into the distance, and in the sudden quiet that followed, Red Flint counted its costs. 3 civilians dead, 5 wounded, 2 marshals killed, 3 more injured. The refugees the Brennans had driven into town as cover were mostly unhurt, but traumatized beyond words. The square was a mess of blood and bodies, testament to how close they'd come to complete disaster. Jian struggled to his feet, his face a swollen mass of bruises, and limped to where Eliza stood over Cole Brennan's body. She was still holding the shotgun, her hands locked around it, her whole body shaking. "You did what you had to do," Jian said gently. "I killed him." Her voice was hollow. "I looked him in the eyes and killed him." "You saved your father. You saved this town. That man would have murdered everyone here without a second thought." "I know." Tears streamed down her face. "I know it was necessary. I know I'd do it again, but it still feels like I lost something, like I crossed a line I can't uncross." Jian took the shotgun from her trembling hands. "Welcome to the frontier. That's the price of survival out here. You do what has to be done, and you carry it with you forever. But you carry it so others don't have to. That's what makes it worth it." Harrow appeared, wrapping his daughter in his arms, murmuring reassurances. Across the square, Father Esteban was organizing medical care, his calm voice directing resources, providing comfort. Mateo was being carried to the doctor, still conscious, already cracking jokes about having matching scars with Jian. Marshal Bridger returned with 4 captured attackers, the last remnants of Chrome's organization. "That's all of them," he said wearily. "The Brennans and their crew were the last major threat. There might be a few scattered sympathizers left, but nothing organized, nothing dangerous." "So it's over?" Harrow asked. "The fighting's over," Bridger confirmed. "The legal work is just beginning. But yes, Judge, I'd say you won. Chrome's empire is finished. His land will be redistributed, his assets seized, his crimes exposed. It'll take months, maybe years, to sort through all the damage he did. But the stranglehold is broken. The frontier's a little freer today than it was last week." They spent the next 2 days cleaning up, burying the dead, treating the wounded, and documenting everything for the inevitable trials. The refugees the Brennans had driven from their village were welcomed into Red Flint, families taking them in, sharing what little they had. It was the frontier way. You survived together, or you didn't survive at all. On the 3rd morning, Jian found himself sitting outside the church with Father Esteban, both men exhausted, battered, but alive. "Raphael's grave is going to have company," the priest said quietly, nodding toward the fresh graves being dug. Marshal Cooper, Senora Martinez, young Thomas from the general store. Good people, killed defending their home. They died free, Jian said. Died fighting for something that mattered. That counts for something. Does it? The priest's voice was gentle, questioning. Or do we just tell ourselves that to make the cost bearable? Maybe both. Jian stretched, feeling every bruise, every broken rib. I've seen a lot of death, Father. Some of it meaningless, some of it necessary, all of it permanent. The only difference is whether the people who survive use that sacrifice to build something better or let it go to waste. And Red Flint? Will we build something better? You already are. I've watched you over the past week, the way you've organized relief efforts, integrated the refugees, started planning for a school and a real clinic. You're not just surviving anymore, you're creating a future. Father Esteban smiled, tired but genuine. We learned from the best. I didn't teach you that. You had it in you all along. You just needed someone to give you permission to believe in it. A rider approached from the east, and Jian's hand moved instinctively to his gun before he recognized Judge Harrow. The older man dismounted stiffly, his face showing the strain of too many long days and sleepless nights. Mr. Vale, Father, I wanted to tell you in person before I sent the official dispatch. Harrow pulled out a document, unfolded it carefully. This is the final certification from the Territorial Land Office. Every deed is recorded, every title transferred, every legal challenge preemptively answered. Red Flint's land belongs to its people now, permanently and irrevocably. No one can take it away. Not even the federal government? Father Esteban asked. Not even them. I made sure the language was airtight. Harrow's expression softened. This town fought for its freedom, paid for it in blood. The least I could do was ensure that sacrifice meant something lasting. What happens to Chrome's other holdings? Jian asked. Being liquidated. The proceeds will go to victims first, families he displaced, people he harmed, towns he destroyed. What's left after restitution will fund territorial improvements, roads, schools, law enforcement. Basically, we're using his stolen wealth to build exactly what he tried to prevent. A frontier governed by law instead of money. Harrow's smile was grim. It's a kind of justice, I suppose. Not perfect, but better than nothing. And the trials? Start next month in Denver. The captured men will face federal charges: murder, conspiracy, racketeering. With the evidence we've gathered, the testimony we've documented, I expect most of them will hang or spend the rest of their lives in prison. Harrow paused. Eliza will testify about what happened here, about why she had to kill Cole Brennan. It won't be pleasant for her. She's strong, Jian said. Stronger than she knows. She learned that from watching you. Harrow's eyes were serious. You showed all of us what real courage looks like. Not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. That's a rare thing, Mr. Vale. Rare and valuable. I just did what needed doing. And you'll keep doing it, I hope. As my special deputy, investigating corruption, protecting people who can't protect themselves. The frontier needs men like you. Jian was quiet for a moment, considering. The commission was still in his pocket, a constant weight against his chest. He'd accepted it in a moment of hope, believing he could find purpose in staying, in building instead of running. But the past 3 days had reminded him of something important. Violence followed him. Death followed him. No matter how hard he tried to walk away, no matter how much he wanted to believe he could be something other than a weapon, the frontier kept proving otherwise. Judge, he said slowly, I'm grateful for the opportunity, but I think I need to decline. Harrow's face fell. May I ask why? Because everyone I try to help ends up in danger. Marshal Cooper died protecting a town I led them to. Those civilians died because the Brennans came looking for me and the people I'd allied with. Even Eliza, she had to kill a man because I involved your family in this fight. Jian met Harrow's eyes. I'm not good for staying, Judge. I'm good for showing up, fixing what's broken, and disappearing before my presence makes things worse. That's not true, Father Esteban said firmly. You didn't bring this violence. It was already here, buried under years of fear and silence. You just helped us find the courage to face it. The Father's right, Harrow added. Without you, Red Flint would be ashes. Chrome would still be in power. The Brennans would be free to terrorize whoever they wanted. Yes, there was cost. But the alternative was worse. Generations living under tyranny, too afraid to resist, too broken to hope. Jian wanted to believe them. Part of him desperately wanted to accept that his presence had been beneficial, that the deaths hadn't been his fault, that he deserved to stay and be part of what they were building. But he'd believed that before, in other places, with other people. And he'd watched those places burn, those people die, the pattern repeating until he'd learned the only lesson that seemed to matter. He was a catalyst for chaos, and the kindest thing he could do was keep moving before the chaos consumed everyone around him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, "but I think it's time for me to go." He stood, ignoring the pain in his ribs, and started walking toward the stable where Raphael's horse waited. Behind him, he heard Harrow and Father Esteban calling his name, but he didn't turn back. Turning back would mean explaining, and explaining would mean admitting truths he'd spent years running from. He was saddling the horse when Mateo limped into the stable, leaning heavily on a crutch, his wounded leg bandaged thick. "You're leaving," the young man said. "Not a question." "I am. Because you think we're safer without you. Because I know you are." Mateo was quiet for a moment, watching Jian work with the saddle straps. Finally, he spoke. "My father died when I was 12, killed by one of Croum's men over a boundary dispute. The man shot him in the street, in front of everyone, and nobody did anything. The sheriff claimed it was self-defense. The judge, the one before Harrow, dismissed the case, and I learned that day that justice was just a word rich men used when it suited them." He shifted his weight, wincing. "I spent the next 8 years watching Chrome take more and more from us, watching my mother work herself sick trying to hold on to land that didn't legally belong to us, watching this whole valley slowly die. And I believed that was just how the world worked, that men like Chrome always won, and people like us always lost." Mateo met Jian's eyes. "Then you showed up, a stranger who didn't owe us anything, who could have kept walking, who had every reason to save himself instead of us, and you stood in front of Croum's guns anyway. You taught us we didn't have to accept tyranny as inevitable. You showed us that one person willing to stand could inspire others to stand with them." He limped closer, his voice intensifying. "So yes, people died. Yes, there was cost. But for the first time in my life, I believe my children might grow up in a world where justice is real, where hard work means something, where being poor and Mexican doesn't automatically make you a victim. You gave us that. Don't you dare walk away now and tell yourself it didn't matter." "It mattered," Jian said quietly. "But that doesn't mean I should stay. You don't need me anymore, Mateo. You've got the judge, you've got the marshals, you've got legal protection and federal oversight. You've got everything you need to build the future you're talking about, except the man who inspired it. Inspiration is just the beginning. What comes after, the hard work, the compromise, the slow grind of building institutions that last, that's not my strength. I'm good at breaking things, not maintaining them." "Then break things somewhere else and come back when we need you again," Mateo said. "Keep the commission. Use it to help other towns, other people who are where we were. But don't disappear completely. Don't make us just another place you helped and abandoned." Jian tightened the last strap, his hands moving automatically while his mind wrestled with the decision. Everything Mateo said made sense. Everything Harrow had offered was exactly what Jian had thought he wanted. But wanting something and being capable of it were different things. He was about to say so when Eliza appeared in the stable doorway, her face determined. "Before you leave," she said, "there's something you need to see." She led him back to the square, where the entire town had gathered. Every family, every child, every person who'd survived the past week of violence and upheaval. They stood together, silent and solemn, watching as Jian approached. Father Esteban stepped forward, holding something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully, revealing a badge. Not a federal commission, but something handmade, crafted from beaten silver, with Chinese characters alongside English words. "The characters say guardian," the priest explained. "The English says Red Flint. We had the blacksmith make it last night." He held it out to Jian. "This isn't from Judge Harrow or the territorial government. This is from us, from the people you saved, the families you protected, the town you helped survive. We want you to have it, whether you stay or go. So you remember that somewhere in this hard frontier, there are people who consider you family. Jian took the badge, feeling its weight in his palm. The craftsmanship was crude but heartfelt, every hammer mark a testament to gratitude and respect. He looked out at the gathered crowd and saw faces he'd fought beside, bled with, nearly died for. Senora Alvarez clutching her land deed like a lifeline. The young mother who'd asked him to teach her children to read. The farmer who'd stood watch through cold desert nights, trusting that Jian would keep them safe. They weren't asking him to stay forever. They were asking him to remember them, to carry them with him, to understand that what they'd built together mattered. And maybe, Jian realized, that was enough. "Thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion he didn't try to hide. "I'll keep this. And I'll keep the commission Judge Harrow offered. I'll use both to do what I can, where I can. I can't promise I'll always be here when you need me, but I promise I won't forget who I am or where I learned it." A cheer went up from the crowd, spontaneous and joyful. Children ran forward, grabbing his hands, their laughter bright against the backdrop of recent tragedy. Adults clasped his shoulders, speaking in rapid Spanish and broken English, their gratitude spilling over in 100 small gestures. Harrow approached, his own badge gleaming in the morning sun. "Does this mean you're accepting the position?" "On my terms," Jian said. "I'm not staying in one place. I'm not playing politics or sitting in offices. But if you point me at corruption, at tyrants, at places where people need someone willing to stand between them and violence, I'll go. I'll do what I can, and when it's done, I'll move on." "That's all I'm asking." Harrow extended his hand. "Welcome to the service of territorial justice, Special Deputy Vale." They shook, and Jian felt something shift. Not transformation, not redemption, but acceptance. Acceptance that he'd never completely escape his past, but he could choose what he did with his present. Acceptance that saving people meant sometimes putting them in danger, but the alternative was abandoning them to tyranny. Acceptance that the frontier would always be hard, always be cruel, but men of principle could still make a difference. The celebration continued through the day and into the evening. Someone produced a fiddle, someone else brought out precious bottles of tequila saved for special occasions. They danced in the square where they'd fought, laughed in the church where they'd signed the deeds that made them free. It was the frontier way, mourning the dead while celebrating survival, honoring sacrifice while embracing hope. As the sun set, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust, Jian found himself standing at the edge of town with Eliza. She'd been quiet since killing Cole Brennan, the weight of that act visible in her eyes. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "Ask me in a year. Ask me in 10. She turned to face him. Father's decided to stay in Ashridge for at least 18 months, overseeing the complete dismantling of Chrome's empire. After that, there's talk of a posting in New Mexico, another territory that needs reform. "And you?" "I'm staying in Red Flint." The words came out firm, certain. "Father doesn't need me following him anymore. These people do. They need teachers, organizers, someone who can help them navigate the legal system and protect the rights they just won. I can do that. I want to do that." Jian smiled. "You're going to be good at it. I learned from the best." She paused, then asked, "Will you come back? After your travels? After you've helped other towns? Will you come back here?" "I don't know," he said honestly. "The frontier's big and there's a lot of work to do. But if I can, if the road leads back this way, then yes, I'll come back." "Good." Eliza stood on her toes and kissed his cheek, quick and gentle. "Because someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed being noble and stupid." She walked away before he could respond, leaving Jian standing alone with the sunset and his thoughts. He touched his cheek where she'd kissed it, feeling the warmth linger, and allowed himself a moment of quiet happiness. The next morning he rode out at dawn, Raphael's horse beneath him, Harrow's commission in his pocket, and Red Flint's badge pinned to his chest where everyone could see it. The town gathered to see him off, waving and calling blessings in Spanish and English, their voices carrying across the desert. Jian didn't look back. He'd learned that looking back only made leaving harder, and he'd be leaving many times in the years ahead. but he carried them with him, their faces, their courage, their determination to build something better from the wreckage of tyranny. The frontier stretched ahead, vast and cruel and beautiful, full of other Red Flints waiting for someone willing to stand between them and the darkness. Jian Vale rode toward it all, no longer running from his past but carrying it forward into purpose. No longer a drifter fleeing violence, but a deputy riding toward it with open eyes. Behind him, Red Flint faded into the morning haze. Ahead, the horizon beckoned with the promise of other fights, other towns, other chances to prove that even on the hardest frontier, justice could survive if someone was stubborn enough to defend it. And somewhere in the space between what had been and what might be, a man who'd spent years believing he was beyond redemption discovered that maybe redemption wasn't about erasing the past. Maybe it was about using the past to forge a future worth fighting for. One town, one stand, one act of defiant courage at a time. The sun climbed higher, burning away the last shadows of night. Jian rode into it, his face toward the light, his purpose clear, his path uncertain but chosen. The story of Red Flint was over. The story of what came next was just beginning. And this time, when violence came, and it would come, it always came, Jian Vale would be ready. Not as a drifter running from his demons, but as a guardian riding toward them, armed with the knowledge that some things were worth fighting for, some people were worth protecting, and some empires needed to fall no matter the cost. The frontier had made him a weapon. Red Flint had taught him to aim that weapon at something that mattered. And in the end, perhaps that was the only redemption the frontier offered. Not absolution, but purpose. Not forgiveness, but the chance to be, finally and completely, the man you chose to become rather than the one circumstance had made you. Jian rode on, and the desert swallowed him up, and somewhere ahead, another town waited for the stranger who would teach them they didn't have to kneel.